Hey guys. You are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Deku became a hero strategist after meeting an underground hero. Here is short summary. Midoriya Izuku was born quirkless. Midoriya Izuku will never become a real hero. But just because he can't be a pro doesn't mean he can't help them out. After all, he's always been good at analysis. Izuku's plan is simple. Get into UA's support course and become a professional strategist to help heroes all over the world. It's not his true dream, but at least this way he has a chance at making a difference. Maybe meet his idol. Then he encounters a mysterious underground hero, and all of his plans go right down the drain. It's hardly his fault. He couldn't have anticipated this. He'd barely even heard of All Might until that day. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Well, Midoriya Izuku looks up, quickly closing the tab on his computer, exiting out of the Hero Forum website. The teacher is looking at him expectantly, arms folded and foot tapping comically on the floor as he waits for an answer. Izuku realizes, with a quick glance around the room, that class is over. His fellow students are still in the class, but they've begun to pack up, migrating to their friends' groups of choice. Huh? Izuku asks, sending a ripple of giggles through the class. 14-year-olds will laugh at anything, so he tries not to take it personally. Still, his head ends up ducked down a little lower than normal. Stay after class please, Mr. Hamasaki says, rolling his eyes slightly. What for? Izuku asks. He's never been kept after for being on his computer. The class is waiting, even if they're trying very hard to look like they're not. It's not often that Izuku is the one who's being scolded, and they're probably curious about what he did. Izuku is curious about what he did. He pauses, rubbing his temples. We should talk after class. It is after class, sir, Izuku says. Fine. It's about your school of choice. Izuku sits up straighter. UA. What's wrong with it? There's another eruption of giggles. There's also the sound of a chair being pushed back. Izuku glances back, and Bakugo is now standing, looking at him with a snarl. Hey, Mr. Hamasaki says, pointing, relax. If I have to report you again, you're getting suspended. He chooses to say this instead of answering Izuku's question. That certainly won't look good on your record, Izuku says, mostly without thinking. He knows Bakugo also wants nothing more than to get into the gleaming halls of UA. Even if I had a murder charge on my record, I'd have a better chance than you, Bakugo snaps. Izuku supposes that's probably a threat. Bakugo, his teacher warns again, looking tired, but he leaves it at that, seeing as Bakugo did listen, and is now firmly turned away, packing his bag. Izuku hadn't realized that you could aggressively pack a backpack. The teacher turns his attention back to Izuku. It's a hero school. But it's a really good school, Izuku says. He's been preparing for this conversation. He had it with his mom, and checked at least 3 times to make sure it was viable. He even ran through the possibility with a couple of the forum guys on a page creatively called Hero Schools. Izuku prepares for another batch of laughter to be thrown in his direction. Do you know what the support course is? Thankfully, the class has quieted down, more interested in not missing the bus than caring about whatever impossible task one of their classmates is attempting. The teacher shrugs. It's some sort of support course. I mean, yeah. It's the people who will help the heroes from the sideline. Costuming, inventions, first aid, all those things. Izuku doesn't mention the other half of his plan surrounding the support course. Yes, they deal with inventions and costumes and such, but they could be doing so much more. Izuku has spent hours analyzing fights and he understands exactly what the harrowing world needs. Strategy. Consultants. People who watch fights and tell heroes exactly what they did wrong and exactly how to do better. Something Izuku could do in his sleep. Heroes are supposed to strategize for themselves, and Izuku is seemingly the only person who realizes that it's something that can and should be outsourced. Heroes should have a team behind them, telling them exactly how to fight. A job that's non-existent now, something that Izuku is pretty sure he was born for. I guess you do have some sort of penchant for stuff like that. What, you want to costume someone? Something like that, he mutters. Another small peal of laughter, although more and more students have begun to leave. Izuku doesn't know why he pushed this. He could have waited until after class. But he knows why he didn't. Because at least 3 different classmates of his, people he's never talked to, people whose names he barely recalls, are nodding. Or shrugging. The slightest hint of approval. In making his announcement to the class, this plan of his has just become realized. Well, alright then, no meeting required. You seem to know what you're doing. Good luck, Hamasaki says, and then he moves on. Just like that. It's the vaguest of permissions from a teacher that Izuku doesn't like, and yet the conversation burns within his throat, hope fluttering through his chest. It's permission to try. He remembers it like it was yesterday, seeing that video. It was an older one, and one of the most popular in the circles of different heroes. There had been a collapsed building due to an unfortunate villain attack and infrastructure flaws. Both common enough issues, but combined, it was disastrous. It had been an office building, with hundreds of civilians still inside the rubble and fire. Death from a disaster the likes that hadn't been seen in years. Izuku could hear the screaming, even from the scratchy video. And then there he was. The bastion of defense, Endeavor, the #1 hero. The image of his expression, as he brought civilians, one after the other, to safety, is still seared into Izuku's mind. An expression of determination stronger than anything Izuku had seen. The strongest man Izuku had ever seen. And at that moment, he knew that he'd become a hero. And then he never developed a power. It was a 1 in 5 chance, and he had been misfortunate enough to win that hellish lottery. The doctors said he was quirkless, and it was the most heart-shattering moment of his entire life. His mom had been there the whole time with him, holding him for the results of each test, crying over her son's pain because she had known what he wanted to do with his life. She understood. But then again, she could have never truly understood. Izuku had cried too. Of course he had. He had been 4, and his whole life had already begun to crumble down around him. But whenever the despair got too much, he would just remember that video. That image of Endeavor, stronger than anyone else in the whole world with flawless determination. After that, Izuku would obsess over the man's interviews, reading or watching anything he could get his hands on, ignoring his pain and only focusing on his budding obsession. And Endeavor's passion would shine through the screen, talking of becoming the best hero possible. At age 8, Endeavor was interviewed by a local talk show, and his mom hadn't needed much convincing at all, allowing him to visit in person with seats in the 3rd row. It had been a grand thing, fans wearing merch, newscasters following the man's every move. Izuku had been so starstruck he had to hold his mom's hand the entire time. Push yourself to your limits and beyond. That's the only way you will accomplish what you want, Endeavor had said, sitting under those bright lights in a chair that looked much too small for him. The interview had continued as if Izuku's world hadn't just changed. He had rewatched the recorded version over and over, even though he had already committed the words to memory. And the next day, when his mom had checked in on him, knocking softly, she had found him with a notebook already almost full and the side of his hand stained by blue ink. He had the foundations of his plan to secure his future as a strategic hero. Quirk or not, class is almost empty after the questioning from Mr. Hamasaki, and Izuku finds himself antsy to get home. It's never safe to stay after upsetting. What are you trying to do, Deku? Bakugo says, slamming his hands on Izuku's desk. That. You think you can rub shoulders with me or something? Izuku waves his hands, probably looking as nervous as he feels. It's the support course, it's really not. You don't have a quirk. You're not going to become a hero, Bakugo spits. Izuku frowns, picking up his backpack. His hands are only slightly shaking. He could give the whole spiel to Bakugo, explain exactly what he's going to do, and how of course he's not going to become an actual hero. But he can't bring himself to speak, because Bakugo's right. Of course Izuku wants to become a hero. A pro, just like Endeavor. Like maybe someone will see him and take it most, pity on him, letting him ride their coattails or something. And Izuku will show the world that a quirkless kid can fight just as good as the best. But he can't think about that dream, because that's never going to be true in the current world. He has to embrace his second choice, Izuku the strategist. The only future that doesn't seem like a world of misery. He stands up and moves past Bakugo, hunching his back, trying to appear smaller than he actually is, knowing that it's the best way to get Bakugo to leave him alone. Every time Bakugo thinks he's won, it's better for Izuku. He makes it halfway to the door when he feels himself slightly relax. He just has to speed walk to the door, and then he'll be home free. What's this? One of Bakugo's friends, lackeys, says. Izuku immediately goes to his pocket, praying he didn't forget. Ah, it's cute, the other one laughs. Izuku turns, spotting his little notebook in the hands of the second guy. It's unmistakably his, small and white, with a couple of hero stickers on it, the biggest one a cartoon drawing of Endeavor. It's one of his many notebooks, a bunch of basic notes of fighting styles that he can easily reference when watching pros on the street. Yeah, Bakugo says, holding a hand out for it. It is. Wait, Izuku says, but he's too late. The notebook is thrown in the air, and Bakugo catches it with one hand, and explosions erupt between the notebook and his fingers. The smell of burning paper follows. Consider this a warning, Bakugo says, sniffing. He casually tosses the notebook outside an open window, and it falls in a burning heap. Some people are born gifted, and some aren't. That's life. Izuku curls his hands into fists, a sort of determination swirling in his stomach. The class has left by now, the door closed, and with no one here, Izuku suddenly feels like a caged animal. He's never tried to fight back. So pray for your next life, I guess. He says, hey, maybe you'll get lucky and get hit by a bus. Bakugo shrugs, slow and relaxed. Like they're still friends. They haven't been anything close to friends for years. I guess you could jump off the building if you want to try to speed up the process. Be proactive. Both of his friends laugh, even though Bakugo didn't say it with any hint of humor, staring straight at Izuku, daring him to challenge what he just said. Izuku just feels shocked, the fight leaving him in an instant because honestly, who tells someone to kill themselves? The shock overcomes any feeling of sadness or anger he could possibly still harbor, and he takes a step back, feet squeaking against the linoleum. The noise alerts Bakugo, who turns at the movement, immediately taking it as a challenge and not an escape. A firework of explosions alight in his hand. Yeah, he sneers, what are you going to do about it? Izuku faintly hears his own voice, reminding him to stay small, stop moving, but it's barely heard over the static in his head because someone just told him to kill himself. Bakugo scoffs again, and before Izuku can take even a single step forward, the three of them leave, passing him with ease, the door slamming behind them. Izuku slumps, his arms wrapping around his knees as he makes his way to the floor. He has to ball his fists to keep them from shaking. Adrenaline, sadness, a bit of anger, all causing tremors to run through his body. But above it all, that constant, thrumming, determination. He finds his notebook, somehow having fallen into a decorative pond, soggy, burnt, and entirely unreadable. The sticker of Endeavor has faded and lifted at the corners. He peels the rest of it off and crushes it in his fist, pocketing the useless piece of paper. He drops the notebook back into the pond with a splash. He walks away, taking deep breaths, trying his best not to cry. He hates it when his research goes to waste. This is just like that time he had recorded a Best Jeanist fight but shattered his phone on the ground when he had been hit by a sonic aftershock from the villain's attack. Izuku wipes his eyes, before turning around, and fishing the notebook back out. He throws it away in the nearest trash can, under the closest bridge. His mom did not raise someone who litters. He sighs again, most of the adrenaline having finally left his system. He'll get into UA, he'll do what he can, and he'll make Endeavor proud. His plan is going to work, and his determination will finally pay off. And everything will be perfectly fine. Izuku needs to get home, though, so he moves on shaky legs, following the easiest path home, under a dark but clean tunnel. This way he can cry for a little longer without anyone noticing. Izuku hears a quiet clattering noise from behind, and assuming it's a biker, he steps to the side without a second thought, pressing his side to the wall of the tunnel, waiting for whoever it is to pass. It's not a biker. Faster than anything Izuku's seen before, a streak of brownish green, something blurs past. He freezes. What? Izuku stumbles back, watching with growing horror as something begins to form. It starts in the shape of dripping liquid, from the top of the tunnel to the cement floor. He moves, as fast as he can, back towards the entrance, trying his best to get out of the passageway. "Ooh, you're quick," the thing says, now still, an ever-growing pile of sludge and mucus. Dripping from the wall of the tunnel like viscous green blood. "You're not very strong, but you're plenty energetic. A fine host, at least until I can find someone better." The drooping pile of sludge forms, for a second, something shaped like a man. And then its shape grows into something less tangible. It's fascinating, and Izuku needs to stop trying to get a better look. It lunges towards him. The mass of the thing is too big for Izuku to do anything but run, and he makes it only 2 steps before the monster has grasped his wrist. And then his neck, and then he's engulfed in sludge. It's immediately like he's drowning. He's pulling at the monster, but it's everywhere, his mouth, his nose, his eyes. He tries to cough, he tries to scream, but that only causes the panic to increase as his brain is made more and more aware of how little air there is and how much everything tastes like the sewers. The taste is worse than anything else. "Shish, this will only hurt for a minute or so," the villain crows, the voice seemingly everywhere around him. It said that the pain would be over, which is funny, because every second is taking an eternity and the pain is unlike anything he's felt before. It's the equivalent of saying burning alive hurts. He's in complete agony. He's still thrashing, but he can't feel his hands, oxygen depleting at a furious rate. Izuku is pretty sure that he's dying now. He's not sure how much time has passed. It could be seconds or hours, but his body has started to relax involuntarily, his struggling slowing and his mind following suit. Izuku is definitely dying. He should have taken up the tuba. Maybe then he would have the lung capacity to survive for a little longer. At least the villain was right. The pain has stopped, replaced by a numb tingling feeling all throughout his body and the exceeding feeling of dread. His plan hadn't accounted for this. All of his filled notebooks and videos of Endeavor watched and hours of research, and instead he's going to die under a tunnel in the most discomfort any person has ever experienced. And he's going to leave his mom all alone. "Hey," something says. Quiet, quieter than the voice from the monster, like a faraway dream. Izuku can't speak, but that voice, that isolated sound fuels him with another round of determination, and he feels himself move just 1/4 of an inch in resistance. "Huh," the voice says again, muffled and quiet, "so you did get another one." Then there's a force of power, not unlike that sonic shock that got him in the best genist fight, rattling his bones. And then the world goes white as his head hits the other side of the tunnel. When Izuku wakes back up, the sky is above him and his body is resting upon warm cobblestone. He's been moved from the alleyway. And he's still alive. He sits up, taking the largest breath he can, trying to clear any of the memory out of his brain. Instead, the only accomplishment he gets is a series of lung-deep coughs. The taste is still in his mouth, the stale air of a sewer system. He is going to throw up. "Here," someone says, and a bottle is rolled to Izuku, hitting his foot. The sloshing red liquid is an anchor from whatever happened in the past couple of minutes. He grabs it, and sits up, feeling the most bizarre aching he's ever felt. Like someone took his collarbone and shook it around. He unscrews the bottle. Soda apparently, but he doesn't even notice until he's already downed half of the drink. The end result is a unique taste in the back of his throat, a mixture of sugary sweet strawberry and sewage. His stomach churns, and he puts his head in his hands as the nausea washes over him. "You all right then?" the voice asks again, Izuku's savior. A man who is currently squatting down and, using another soda bottle and a plastic spoon, scooping up the remnants of the sludge monster that had attacked him. The villain has seemingly mostly gone to liquid at this point, if the stains on Izuku's uniform indicate anything, but there are still more solidified clumps of the villain, and that's what the man is focusing on. Izuku distantly wonders how someone can live with a quirk like that. The man, the non-liquid one, is wearing black clothing, a loose hoodie and sweats, with golden hair that falls down to his chin. He's scrawny, with a thin face and impossibly dark eyes. His expression is focused, his tongue sticking out as he concentrates on collecting the rest of the demolished villain. Is that a spoon?" Izuku somehow coughs out. The man turns to him, tilting his head a bit, dark eyes reflective under the midday sun. "I don't want to get my hands all gross." Izuku looks down at his uniform again, hoping that his mom will be okay buying another, because he is absolutely going to burn this one. "This should be enough," the man says, shaking the bottle with the villain inside. "He'll reform from this source point." He pauses again, looking to the bottle. "Probably." Izuku struggles upwards, but there's a hand quickly helping him up, despite the previous protests of getting dirty. Izuku stands, breathing heavily even from that. It feels like everything has been completely drained from him, like that time he went swimming for 7 hours straight when he was 6. "Hey kid, you need to use my phone," the man asks, and Izuku pats his jacket. He quickly locates his school bag, which apparently he had dropped as he was getting attacked. They're standing just outside the tunnel, which Izuku realizes he probably can't take as a shortcut home ever again. "No," Izuku says, weakly pointing to the bag, "it's in there." The guy grabs the bag and tosses it to Izuku. "You should call an ambulance," the man shrugs, beginning to walk away. "You were out for a while." "It's not good." "How long?" Izuku asks. "Too long, kid," the man says, scooping up 2 reusable grocery bags. He turns his head back and gives Izuku a look, but he doesn't stop, walking towards the end of the street. He's leaving the rest up to Izuku. Izuku fishes out his phone and types the 3 numbers for the ambulance. He's looking down at his phone when there's a notification for the Hero Forum website. HeroLog.org is one of the oldest Hero Forum websites in the modern era. It's a shoddy website, and one of the least popular ways of interacting with other fans. Most people use more fast-paced sites to talk about the recent fights, and whichever pro they find hottest at the moment. But HeroLog.org is one of the most accurate and updated sources of current information about heroes. It's a collaboration by the public for the public. Die-hard fans who want to analyze every move, those who have had personal interactions with pros, even heroes themselves, looking to find information that's not easily accessible. It's mostly an archive website with a booming Q&A portion. There's close ties and many cross-references from the major hero wikis. Izuku has been a member since the age of 8, using the home computer and a cushion on his dad's office chair to reach the keyboard. Ever since he started middle school, he's been regularly answering questions, but much more commonly, he's a very frequent asker. He's also become a moderator on 5 different pages, all for individual heroes. His proudest achievement is becoming one of the mods for the Best Jeanist page. He most commonly visits the page for Endeavor, but that's true of basically anyone who uses the site, especially for the die-hards who congregate on this website. Endeavor has the most popular page. That's what the number 1 deserves, of course. The one he gets the notification for is the complete opposite. It's an image, a shitty meme about blonde people. This fan page has 16 regulars and 4 moderators. Izuku doesn't frequent it enough to become a moderator, but he's been offered the position 2 different times due to the theorizing and info gathering he's done for the page. It'd be a disservice to those 16 regulars since he's not on as often as he'd need to be to answer questions, so he's rejected it both times. The page is for an underground hero, a patrol hero. "Wait," Izuku mutters, not loud enough to get the man's attention, who's still walking away, hands in his pockets, grocery bags on his wrists. He doesn't look like the couple of grainy photos that Izuku has seen. That shows a hulking figure of a man, powerful and terrifying in every way. Blurred images of him keeping a villain at bay until the actual pros get there, containing the chaos of a night attack. There are also a couple of him patrolling, all the things that underground heroes are expected to do. But there had been a proposed theory. The figure of that underground hero is so vast and distinctive, that it must be a disguise of sorts. He's so recognizable that he must look different in the daytime. Izuku never bought it, but now that he's here. "All might," he says, loud and clear through the street, standing up despite the pains from the attack, the ache still bone deep. The man freezes. The groceries slip from his hands as he slowly turns, tilting his head and frowning. "That's you, right?" Izuku asks. "You're..." "Don't say it again." All Might cuts in, broken from his frozen stupor, stalking forwards, then back to his forgotten groceries and picking them back up, and then back to Izuku. He's like a lost duck. Izuku moves on weak legs and goes to help him. He takes one of the bags from All Might. He's never had a conversation with a hero, pro or otherwise. He wishes he had his notebook still. He'll have to resort to summing up their conversation on his phone's notes app later. If he can get a picture as proof, the All Might page is going to flip. All Might sighs, scrunching up his face a bit as he thinks, pacing for real now. He hands Izuku the other bag as he does. The sun is shining, the trees are rustling, there are birds in the sky, and Izuku is the most nervous he's ever been. This is an actual hero, standing in front of him. Izuku is holding his grocery bags. Apparently he really likes udon. All Might starts, a hand over his mouth, considering. Do underground heroes kill civilians to protect their own identities? Probably not. Eventually he stands straight, looking at Izuku. You hungry? Sure, he says, trying to stay as casual as humanly possible. He's frantically running through his list of potential questions to ask that don't make him sound like an insane fan. Most of his questions revolve around pro heroes, so he's not sure where to start with the underground type. He didn't really think he'd ever have this opportunity because they're, well, underground. Secretive for a reason. Great, he says, I'm gonna need some more soda anyways. Chapter text. Best Genist page. Ugly Duckling 43. Does anyone else think that Best Genist is kinda hot? Smiling face flushed. Mod Bastion of Intel. Oh my god, how many times do we have to go over this on this page? Yes, everyone thinks he's attractive. This isn't news, and it's not something to be embarrassed about. It's literally just a true fact. The walkover starts uncomfortable and it only gets worse. Anything Izuku tries to say gets caught up in his throat. Is he even allowed to question this man? They're in public, and All Might hasn't broached the subject of starting a conversation. So they walk in silence. Izuku has already texted his mom that he's eating a late lunch with some friends. She'll probably be delighted. She always is whenever he mentions having friends. One day she'll figure out that he's been lying to her. About 6 minutes into the walk, All Might slows so they're walking side by side. Don't call me the name, he says under his breath, bad things will happen to me. Okay, Izuku says, slow and a little high-pitched as they round a corner. The grocery store is a blast of cold air and colorful displays. Meet here when you're done, All Might says, pointing at a rather loud fruit stand displaying a bunch of in-season mangoes. And then he's off for the soda. He simultaneously lost to both Izuku and the slime villain. Izuku picks out the cheapest lunch he can because he doesn't have enough pocket money for much else. Plus he'd probably throw up anything he'd have to choke down right now. At least get a drink, All Might says, looking at the sad food Izuku picked out, so he grabs a water, the farthest he can get from that soda he had earlier. All Might pays for his choices. Izuku thinks about protesting, but the words end up dead in his throat for the second time, and they end up at a nearby picnic bench. Kids recently done with school running around on the playground, their exasperated parents watching them with concern. The trees are tall and beautiful, shading the bench just enough so that it's not too hot. All Might hands him his lunch, sits down in a huff, and then stares at him with a sharp gaze for a long minute. Izuku feels himself sweating under his collar. He ends up opening his water to make himself busy. The water still doesn't much help the lingering taste in his mouth, but it's something to do. He has to force himself to swallow it. How much do you know about underground heroes? All Might asks, steepling his fingers together and keeping up that intense stare. Well, a little, I guess, Midoriya mutters, looking down. His water bottle suddenly becomes much more interesting, the plastic crinkling in between his fingers. Yeah, All Might asks, finally averting his gaze, pulling out a foil-wrapped cake and small fork. How All Might can eat after all that cleanup, Izuku's not sure, but you recognized me. I mean, there are the forums, Izuku says. He probably shouldn't lie to this man. Izuku can't imagine ever lying to a hero. Forums, All Might asks, unwrapping his treat. There are like these internet pages, I guess. Izuku squints at All Might. How old is this guy? How much will Izuku have to explain about the modern-day webspace? We gather info on heroes. All Might pauses for a moment. Well, that's stupid of you. Izuku cringes at the glare. Underground heroes rely on anonymity to make sure their patrols are effective, so having a whole website on us is. No, Izuku says, it's all heroes. Honestly, your page is one of the least trafficked I've seen. All Might takes a second to consider. I guess it's inevitable. You must be a pretty big fan of me, then, he decides after a second, if you recognized me. Izuku scratches his cheek and looks to the side. He still hasn't eaten anything, so the prolonged silence can't be excused by anything else. I'm not really. Oh, All Might questions. He seemingly believes him. In fact, a bit of humor has snuck into his tone. No, I mean, Izuku says, trying to backtrack, I'm basically a huge fan of the concept of heroes. I researched you for like a week straight. He got into a 5-page argument with one of the moderators over whether or not a blonde civilian in the background of an Endeavor fight was All Might. He still frequents that page just to chat with that moderator sometimes and check up on the enthusiastic fans to see what else they've unearthed. But I've researched every hero for at least a week. Not just you. Ah, All Might tilts his head, so you're the exception. Izuku isn't sure how he feels about being called an exception, but he nods anyways. How do you recognize me like this? All Might continues, I don't fight like this. Well, most of your fights are seen around this area, and you were fast. Most heroes use slow but effective fighting styles, yet with how quick you destroyed that slime monster, you couldn't really be anyone else. He doesn't mention that Endeavor also works fast. Those men couldn't be farther apart in appearance and power. I couldn't have been out for more than a couple of minutes, so I'm pretty sure you got the guy in like one hit. Plus there's a theory that you've got like this second form. A couple other heroes actually also have that sort of thing. For example, there's a pro who uses it to almost perfectly protect their own identity. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if there were a bunch of underground heroes we just don't know about because of how well they protect their. All right, yes, All Might says, laughing, exception was right. Kid, you are enthusiastic. Izuku stops with a deep breath, realizing that he was talking very quickly. He needs to learn to quit the rambling, because even if his mother tolerates it, this is a stranger and a hero. I like heroes, Izuku says lamely, tucking a tuft of hair behind his ear, trying to stay casual after word vomiting in front of All Might. Yeah, I'd say, All Might says, still smiling, before sighing. He scratches his neck, but I don't want you to let it influence what I'm about to say. I'm asking for a favor, unrelated to the fact that I'm a hero. He takes another bite of cake, and then points the fork in Izuku, face serious, you can't let this out, seriously. Don't go running to your website telling that you got to talk with me. You can't let anyone know who I am. A lot hinges on it. Izuku sighs, but he nods. He knew this was coming. He understands what underground heroes are. He knows that they value their privacy, sometimes above their own life, and it was stupid to assume he'd. All Might lays a hand on his shoulder, face stony and fierce all at the same time. I'm serious, kid. This could mean death for a lot of people. Izuku nods, slower this time. He doesn't remember the risk of underground heroes being so dire. But he's also not an idiot. So he nods again, more sure. He'll do it. All Might stares at him for a second longer, and then leans back. He eats the rest of his cake in 2 big bites, and crinkles the foil in his hand. He tosses it to a trash can, missing. Embarrassing, he says, standing up to put the trash where it goes. It gives time for Izuku to take another drink of the water and not compartmentalize any of this conversation. All Might returns, scooping up his groceries yet again. Keep that bag. He motions to the empty grocery bag on the table, weighted under Izuku's mostly full water bottle. Take your leftovers home, he says, turning to leave. Before he does, he pauses, looking back again. You want to go to UA, yeah? How do you know? Izuku asks. A kid like you, with a head full of information like that, All Might taps his temple. It's not a hard guess. Plus I'm a bit biased. He pauses. I went there. Izuku files the information away. It's so strange to be able to just sit down and talk to this man, a real-life hero. He's going to try and remember every little detail. Yes, well, I think there's like this gap when it comes to strategizing in the hero world. I think I could make a niche for myself as a consultant for a pro. Like from the sidelines, help them strategies and look at fights. Maybe. All of his conversations, his justification, his planning, all of it feels stupid and small in front of All Might, a real-life hero. Instead, All Might smiles at him, gleaming and joyous. Genuine. Don't sideline yourself, kid. You're pro material. And suddenly, Izuku's plan seems like the worst possible future. Thank you, he has to say, because nothing else can get out through the crushed feeling in his chest. The swirling nothingness in his throat, the pain that reverberates all around his heart, because he'll never be a pro hero. He won't fit into any of the 4 hero categories, he has to be sidelined, a worker desperately trying to get the attention of someone doing so much more for society than Izuku could ever even hope to with 1,000 lifetimes. All Might has walked away, taking his bags with him, and Izuku only realizes then that he's crying. Tears running down his cheeks from the whole day, the exhausting encounter with Bakugo, the attack, and now this. A real concrete proof that if he had been born even a bit more lucky, he would be a hero. A real, pro hero. He sits there for a minute, another, just trying to understand what god he slighted, who made this desperate longing within him. Why can't he just accept that he'll never be a pro? It's a Herculean task that he's pretty sure he'll die over. His secondary plan is fine. It works. Or it has up until now. He sniffs, grabbing one of the napkins that have been left in the bag and wiping his face, grime staining the white paper. He needs to get home and try to forget any of this ever happened. All Might doesn't need to worry about any information on him getting out. Izuku's never going to think about this day again. He stands, shoving his lunch in the grocery bag and standing up, grabbing the bag. And realizes that it's too heavy to be empty. Izuku looks up to where All Might has disappeared, and digs into the bag, pulling out whatever he accidentally left behind. He grabs it by the cap, and takes it to the light. It's got a gritty feeling, warm under his fingers, the liquid inside a sick green color. An eye opens from the middle of the bottle, finding Izuku. He drops it. The rattling is enough to loosen the cap, and the thing immediately begins to ooze out of the bottle. Izuku scrambles back, tripping over a tree root. He gets up onto his knees and again, that tight suffocation suddenly returning as the attack comes right back to the forefront of his brain. His talk with All Might, Bakugo, none of it matters right now, because the monster is right in front of him, and soon that suffocation might very well become a reality again. And this time he won't be saved. It creeps towards him, spider-like strands of liquid dragging the thing forward. Izuku stills, terrified. Strangely, the thing slows, before quickly changing direction, heading for a storm drain. Izuku remembers the mass that had made up most of the villain was water, probably from the sewer. He stands, fear turning into something a bit more concrete. He can't let that thing get back into the public, because no one else should experience what he had to go through. He grabs the bottle, quick as he can, and throws himself down to the sewer grate, trying to scoop up the villain. It slips between his fingers, not dazed any longer, quick to escape. Plus, Izuku doesn't have a spoon. He tries one final time to stomp on the thing, but he's pretty sure that just pushes the thing farther into the grate. He kneels down, trying to grasp at something, anything. But it's gone. He's left panting in the middle of a park, next to a storm drain, streaks of tears through the grime on his face, hands on the sides of the storm drain. He probably looks like a sight indeed. But he can't linger, because if that thing is still out there. He runs out of the park, in the direction that All Might left to. The streets are full of the usual after-school traffic, kids and teenagers walking home from the different schools of the areas. A man well into his 30s, 40s. Izuku isn't sure, but either way, All Might's old enough to stand out. Plus he apparently likes to dress very casually, which makes him stand out even more against all the uniformed students. Izuku swiftly maneuvers through the crowds. After years of practice getting to the front of them with all the nearby villain fights, it's quite easy. Precious minutes pass and he eventually finds him at the edge of a mass of civilians. All Might's hands are in his pockets, squinting his eyes at the forming crowd. Izuku takes a quick detour to step up onto a fountain as he's walking, gaining the height to see what's going on. He can't see much, but what he can see doesn't bode well for his hope that the monster might take a while to regenerate. It's there, slowly oozing up from a sewer gate, seemingly much larger than before. There's construction in this area, which means many of the civilians are wearing hard hats with bright yellow vests, waiting nervously for whatever this is to be contained. Izuku vaguely recalls a fight last week between Endeavor and a bank robber that led to a chase down in the sewers, so there's a chance that they're repairing that. Izuku runs to where All Might has pulled out his phone. Getting a video, Izuku asks, out of breath. All Might jumps and swears at his sudden appearance. A lot of people are recording. You can get a lot of views online from a villain attack. I'm notifying a pro, All Might says, grabbing his own shoulder, hand crossing over his chest, someone to deal with this. And you can't, Izuku asks. He remembers the great force of All Might's power, clearing the monster in a millisecond from Izuku's system. Not in public, kid, All Might says, powering down his phone and slipping it into his pocket. I'm on crowd control now. He claps his hands, his persona changing suddenly from a civilian to a trained pro. He begins to clear people out of the way, stopping people from recording, and checking on one older man who's already gotten injured in the mass of people. The monster has enveloped the manhole cover, rising up like a geyser, eyes scanning the crowd as it does. Izuku remembers the look it had given him from the bottle, analytic and scathing. He remembers the way it grabbed him, the scorned commentary about Izuku's own physical weakness. It's trying to find a better host. A stronger host. Hey dumbass, you're blocking the crosswalk, a too familiar voice says from the edge of the crowd on the opposite side of the clearing. Bakugo steps out with his hand held to his side, lights flaring out from his fingers, something Izuku's seen a million times. Oh God, Izuku mumbles, moving forward before he can even stop himself, because this can only end terribly. You seem powerful, the voice says, almost echoing in Izuku's head exactly like before. But this time it's not directed at him. You'll do wonderfully. Izuku moves through the crowd, weaving around the groups of pedestrians craning their necks for a better look at the spectacle. He finds a spot where he's able to see through the thinner part of the crowd to watch the scene taking place. Izuku watches in terror as the monster in front of the crowd reaches above the head of Bakugo, who looks up with an incredulous expression. The monster begins to fall, like dripping rain, slow at first, tendrils catching the limbs of Bakugo as he sends a shock of explosions its way. Some of the arm-like goo successfully bursts apart, but since he's trying to explode water, and it reforms quickly. The monster grabs both of his hands, encapsulating them both in thick green slime, preventing any usage of his quirk. Izuku watches as Bakugo's eyes widen, the closest he's ever seen to fear. He's too late to prevent it, but maybe he can still help. Izuku moves through the crowd, prepared to fight. What is he doing? Izuku stills to a stop, bumped by the occasional passerby. Izuku is a middle school civilian. A quirkless one at that. The only person with any hope of doing anything at all is All Might, who definitely can't compromise his identity like this. For this, Izuku watches as the crowd shrinks back, terrified of the scene unfolding in front of them. Izuku can barely make out Bakugo, drowning in the street as civilians watch with a mixture of horror and an underlying fascination. No one stepping forward, no one with any hope of doing anything but watching. He sees someone, All Might, making his round in the crowd again. He clearly spots Izuku and makes his way towards him. All Might lays a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Hey kid, it's time for you to get out of here. The pros are almost here, they'll handle it. But they're not here yet, and Izuku can't wait that long. Bakugo can't wait that long. In front of them, Bakugo tears the sludge from his neck and face, trying desperately to do anything to kill the villain. Izuku knows the feeling all too well. Bakugo gets out a singular, ragged scream, angrier than Izuku's ever heard him. His hands are covered in the green mud, so any explosions are contained by the mass of viscous fluid. He's strong, a black-haired civilian whistles to the woman he's with. Izuku remembers hearing something about an exercise regiment, something Bakugo bragged about to his friends. Izuku knows that he occasionally did mock MMA quirk fights, but still, what middle schooler goes to the gym? It clearly doesn't matter, because after barely a second, the monster envelops his face again, silencing him. Izuku shrugs the hand off after another second of watching the fight, his heart racing with horror. He has to act fast, if he wants to be able to help Bakugo while he still has energy. Kid, All Might starts, sounding exasperated, but Izuku ignores him again, breaking into a sprint. The crowd is thin enough in the front to easily navigate, which means Izuku is almost immediately in the space between the monster and the crowd. He understands why the space is where it's at, and why the crowd is slowly moving backwards. There's fear, sure, but people also don't want to get their shoes wet. Water is seeping between the cobblestones and Izuku has no way of stepping over it. Izuku takes a deep breath, heart slowing as he surveys the scene. He's lived this just today, it shouldn't be impossible to figure out something that he could do to help from the outside. All Might said help was coming, but that could be minutes from now, and that might be too late. Izuku furrows his eyebrows, thinking of the hero that might show up. Endeavor might, this is the sector of the city he shows up in most, but then again, Bastionist has an equal possibility to appear. It's going to be hard to help someone who's actually being actively consumed by the villain, but Endeavor especially has a hard time doing attacks that aren't just straight-up obliteration. He's hurt a couple of civilians just with the excess heat he uses. Kid, All Might yells, and Izuku realizes he hasn't been stuck in his head for too long. Which is good, because he knows what he needs to do. Because the pro might not show up in time to be able to help anyone, but Izuku knows someone who's got a pretty good power. He puts down his backpack, grabbing something from the front pouch, the heaviest thing he can find at short notice, and putting it into his pants pockets. He runs forward, eliciting another one of the group gasps, one that he tunes out. His head is filled with static and just a simple forward movement of his plan, he doesn't have time for the crowd. There's two parts to this plan, and the desperate one begins with a dive, straight into the heart of the fluid monster. Izuku surges forward, digging his arms into the villain's body, searching with frantic breathing, praying that he can. There, he feels for just a second, Bakugo's fingers, moving still under the pressure of the twisting villain. He's able to grab onto his hand for just a moment, a perfect, planned moment. And then the monster wraps an arm around Izuku's middle, pulling. Izuku holds on for too tight and too long, which means there's a sick straining feeling from his shoulder. He can't dislocate his arm now, not after he was so close, so he lets go. The two are torn apart with dangerous strength, and he's flung from his goal, landing hard onto the cobblestones. The green slurry twists around his legs, raising him up as Izuku flails, trying to keep his balance as he's lifted to whatever this thing considers to be his face. "Oh, it's you again," the thing sneers, eyes focusing on Izuku, veiny and almost entirely black. Izuku feels a bead of sweat drip down his neck as he subtly slips his hand into his pocket. Bakugo is close enough to see through the haze of the green liquid, and he's struggling to get his arms free as the thing contorts around him like a python, hungry for another taste of death, my friend. I've found a better replacement, he's much strange. The second part of the plan is simple. Izuku grabs his phone, hefting it in his hand and throwing it at the thing, as fast as an arrow. And just like an arrow, it strikes true, hitting the villain in its left eye. There's a harrowing scream, similar to a blaring alarm, loud and jarring and terrible. But Izuku can't linger on the noise, because he only has a few precious seconds as the villain frantically tries to cover its eye in pain. Izuku reaches again, straight into the monster, ignoring the panicked feeling in his own chest as the sludge crawls up his torso, aiming to suffocate him again. He can't think about that if he wants to do anything to help. He finds Bakugo's hands again, and this time grabs his wrist. He pulls as hard as he can, the slurry now climbing up his arm. He uses his other arm, and begins to clear away the muck. Pulling at it, it comes away like clumps of jelly. The villain once again takes his head, water filling his nose and mouth, dragging him back to the darkness of looming unconsciousness for the second time in one day. But he's still holding on to Bakugo. And Bakugo's holding on just as tight, so Izuku pulls one more time, struggling to release the only person who's going to be any good with the current situation. Izuku certainly can't help, but Bakugo can. There's an explosion, one loud and close, barely muffled by the water in Izuku's ears. Then there's another, and another. A myriad of explosions surround the monster, at least from Izuku's sound-only perspective. Bakugo, with the second of freedom, his hand free for just a second, is trying his damnedest to kill this thing as fast as possible. Izuku gets a breath of fresh air as the villain begins to scream, trying to recoup all of its mass as fast as it can while also trying to dodge the explosions. Izuku, still mostly encased, gasps, trying to blink his eyes clear. Instead, he hears a creaking, an ominous sound from below him. Below him, the street gives out in a crumbling motion, a sinkhole collapsing inwards, created by the mass of the monster, the wild explosions, and the week-old fight. And so, Bakugo, Izuku, and the villain fall into the sewers below. Toshinori watches the kid struggle, his feet planted in the ground and his insides a torrent of emotions. The kid is fighting for his classmate's life, hands tearing at the villain, completely alone. Toshinori has to help, his heart is racing and his hands won't stop shaking. But his feet aren't moving, because he logically understands that he can't do anything right now, not without compromising everything he's ever worked for. If he helps now, he'll never work again as an underground hero, and more importantly, One for All will be seen yet again. People will recognize it, Toshinori will endanger everyone he knows. But that doesn't matter anymore, does it? The thought isn't helpful. Toshinori takes a deep breath, shoving his shaking hands in his pockets, and the thought aside, and then stares at the slowly darkening sky, willing the nearest crow to finally show up. Toshinori doesn't have a choice when it comes to the alerts he sends on his phone. As an underground hero he just waits and does all he can to contain a scene, without compromising his entire identity. There's the sound of an explosion. Toshinori jumps at the noise, immediately shoving forward, because there are too many civilians here for any explosions. He catches the tail end of the eruptions, shot off at random locations, because clearly the classmate doesn't have the eyes to properly aim. How did he even get partially free? There's smoke rising from the center of the crowds as they all watch with bated breath. It seems that the captured boy isn't entirely helpless. In fact, his quirk seems pretty impressive for someone at his age. More important than any of this, of course, is the fissures in the road, crawling fast around the monster and stemming from the newly created construction. Get back, Toshinori yells, turning to the cluster of civilians nearest to the villain, ushering them back. He gives one look behind him, wincing as the road collapses, the children falling from the road. It's a disaster. It's also an opportunity, because it's already taken too long for the pro to get here, and under the cover of the sewer and the road. Toshinori rushes forward, already feeling the swell of power from within. No one tries to stop him, probably more confused than anything as the second civilian rushes the monster. He hops down onto the rubble, the trail of slime glistening on the broken road. He lands in a foot of stagnant water, and cringes at the smell. It's dark, but not too dark to see, and he sees the green mass ramble around a corner, still determined to find a suitable host. Toshinori moves quick, finally under the cover of the street and blocked from supervision. He disregards his jacket and takes another rattling breath, the power flowing through his body, reminding him of how it feels to be a hero. How it felt before his injury, and before. He keeps moving, breathes deeper, and legs much faster. He feels strong. His physical appearance has changed too, so he certainly looks stronger as well. He rounds the corner, the way only lit by the occasional orange lamp, and spots the monster, practically dragging the two kids with it. He isn't sure what it wants, but it's endangering children, which means Toshinori won't stand for it. It doesn't notice him, so the jump attack is simple. Let the power burn behind his fist and a bit in his calves, and hit as hard as he can, avoiding where the kids are being slowly suffocated, and avoiding any vital spots. He hopes it's not too late for the loud blonde one. The monster finally notices him when he's already feet in the air. You again, he hits, the power leaving his arm in an explosion of brute force, aiming where he hopes is the equivalent of one of the legs. And, because he's All Might, he hits perfectly, a huge blast of power crushing the villain's head between his fist and the wall of the sewer. There's a second of perfect silence. Heavy breathing from Toshinori, because even this is almost too much in his current state. But the children are safe, and hopefully alive. A crack runs from the wall, under Toshinori's fist. The sewer had already been hit with an avalanche of explosions in the attack last week. And now Toshinori has just cemented a real disaster. There's another crack in the wall, another fissure, another collapse inevitable. Toshinori turns, spotting the two kids a couple feet away from the splattered remains of the villain. And he prays that they're far enough away to be safe. Izuku opens his eyes. There's dust above him, dust below him. Even on his lips, when he licks his dry mouth, it's all dust. He sits up, slowly, wincing as he tries to find all of his injuries. A deep cut on his arm, a broken toe or two, and a pounding headache. He clears his face as best he can, using the inside-out part of his shirt, breathing against the rising bile in his throat. He tried to save Bakugo, and he didn't even try to question why. He stands up, because he's going to do it again. He stumbles for a second in the dusty dark prison that he now apparently lives in, finding his balance when he spots the form of a person. He finds Bakugo, head slumped against the wall and bleeding from a head wound. "Kachan?" Izuku asks, quite, and feels for a pulse. He finds one, and no other obvious injury besides the head, so he stands back up. He's not touching someone who could have a spinal injury. The dust is slowly settling, so Izuku catches a view of something. A pole maybe, a support beam from the building, just a silhouette against the dust. Maybe he can use it to climb to safety. He walks forward through the dead clumps of sludge. There's something at the bottom of that metal pole, and dread fills Izuku's stomach in a second. But he keeps moving until the figure becomes clear through the orange hazy light. Izuku falls to his knees before All Might, who's been stabbed through the abdomen, pinned to the ground and staring at nothing, rapidly blinking. There's blood pooling below him and seeping from his mouth, staining his teeth. He's grimacing. Izuku holds out shaky hands, but he pauses beyond that. All Might is sitting, lying, on a pile of rubble, pole stabbed vertically through him, and it clearly takes effort for him to look at Izuku, a bit of the pain clearing from his eyes as he smiles, small and almost impossible. His hand is resting against his own abdomen, blood seeping in rivulets between the fingers. "Kid," he rasps out, and Izuku shakes his head. His own throat is so clogged that he can't bring himself to even start to form a sentence. All Might shouldn't talk, but Izuku can't tell him to be quiet. "Kid, you have to listen to me." Izuku can't seem to stop shaking, but through it all, he keeps eye contact with him. All Might raises a hand, slow and sluggish, like he's losing control of his own limbs, and grabs Izuku's collar with strength Izuku didn't expect. And then All Might smears his other, bloodied, hand against the bottom of Izuku's face. Izuku winces at the sudden taste of iron, blood already seeping into his mouth. He coughs, spitting up what he can from his mouth, trying not to leave All Might's side. He swallows down more bile than blood as he tries to wipe the stain from his mouth. There's a sudden storm. He coughs again at the taste of iron, but it's nothing against the power of the sun that's suddenly between Izuku's lungs. What? He coughs in full now, pushing himself away from the dying man, retching at the taste of blood and sewers and somehow, strawberry. There's a sudden power that's enveloping everything within Izuku. "Kid, you have to keep listening. Is the other one still alive?" All Might says, louder now, and Izuku hears the shifting of rocks. He looks up through tears as All Might tries to move towards Izuku. He has to subdue him, so he returns, crawling back impossibly numb legs. He has to ignore the power for now, but his breathing is becoming faster and frantic as it tries to catch up with whatever happened. There's the smallest voice in the back of his head, wondering if this is how Endeavor feels, with the power of fire and light just behind his hands. "He's still alive," Izuku says, the words coming slow out of his mouth through the thick taste of blood. "If you use what I just gave you, it will tear you apart," All Might says. "Your entire body will explode, and that is not a metaphor." You don't have the physical strength to use it right now. Izuku nods. It's my quirk. It's not genetic, it's been passed down for 8 generations, and it's an inheritance. He coughs again, another spurt of thick blood running from his lips. Izuku barely comprehends the word inheritance, the sudden power swirling, before, and you're going to give it to your classmate over there. Izuku feels his world turn a little bit sideways. It enhances the user's original quirk, and he's got a hell of a one. Plus he'll be physically strong enough to handle it soon. All Might laughs then coughs again. It should be enough. Enough? Izuku asks, feeling a hot tear run down his cheek, which he quickly wipes off. Enough of what? Enough to protect it. All Might says, someone is after that power, and these next hours are crucial to keep it safe. He will hear about my death. Your friend has the raw talent to protect this ability, so you need to go. He grabs Izuku's arm, where one of the deeper cuts lacerated his pinky finger. He squeezes out another droplet of blood, and make him consume your blood. Then you tell him to go to Gran Torino. I'm so sorry. Izuku is frozen. He's seen All Might fight through grainy forum videos. He's felt the blast of his powers. He knows what this man is capable of. And everything inside of his chest is telling him that he's just as capable of those things right now. Only for right now. What sick joke is the universe pulling on him? Hey, All Might says, coughing again, weaker this time, catching Izuku on the arm again, making sure Izuku is looking at him. Izuku sits up straight. There's someone else who might start looking for me. If he finds you, tell him I left a note under his bed. What? Izuku asks. The request is so simple and yet impossibly vague. There isn't a response. All Might. Izuku asks again, softer. The storm is the only thing he feels for the next couple of minutes. Even when Endeavor shows up, blazing and awesome, crushing the final pieces of the villain between his smoking fingers, all Izuku can do is step aside when the man inspects All Might. All Might's body. He even checks on Bakugo again, staring down at his unconscious face. When he checks his pulse for the second time, he leaves behind red. Izuku has bloody hands and a bloodier face. He holds his stained pinky to his face, trying to consider it an impossible task. He turns to the tunnel. He wipes off his face, mixing the tears and the blood, trying to stop the taste. He finds the entrance, which means he finds the sky. Cloudy and gray, it started to rain, just the occasional patter from the already darkened sky. His mom is probably waiting for him to come home for dinner. The civilians have cleared out, and they're trying to make a way for an ambulance to cart away the 2 survivors. He doesn't feel anything about that. He smells burning. When he was little, he accidentally touched a cast iron skillet, and the smell is remarkably similar. The sharpness of it shakes him a bit, the smell of burning flesh, so he stands and returns to the tunnel. Every step he takes feels like an impossibility, but each one also feels enforced by the power inside him. Like he contains worlds inside of him. Izuku finds something he couldn't have even hoped for. He's still. Let me work, Endeavor says, low and quiet, hands pressed against the stomach of All Might, burning where the flesh won't meld with the pole. He's cauterizing the wound, trying to save All Might. Which means there's still a life to try and save. Izuku finds himself next to Bakugo. The smell had become too much for him after just a couple of minutes, so he retreated and tried not to feel cowardly about the decision. He sits on the rubble, staring up at the blinking orange light and ignoring whatever quirk has been thrust upon him. It's not his to keep. How injured are you? Endeavor asks, from where he's rounded the corner. Oh God, there's another one. Izuku looks up at Endeavor, who's staring down at Bakugo. He lowers himself and checks on Bakugo with delicate movements that don't match his bulky frame. He slowly checks his neck, hand moving down his spine, before nodding, just out for a bit I think. It's been too long, Izuku says, blankly. If it's longer than a couple of minutes he should go to the hospital. I think even if he were fully conscious, I'd still take him to the hospital. A sewer collapsed around the 2 of you, I wouldn't be surprised if he had some broken ribs. Izuku nods, not really feeling much at all. Endeavor's been his idol for years, and now that he's here, Izuku can only feel dread, pain, and numbness. You too, Endeavor continues, offering a hand, charred and blood-flaked. You need to get out of here too. Izuku can't take it. Is he alive? For now. Izuku scrunches his eyes closed, a couple more tears running free. He takes a shuddering breath, out of relief, or fear, or just everything that's happened, he's not sure, and a bit of the feeling returns. He stands with the help of Endeavor, who picks Bakugo up, carrying him like a sleepy little kid. What did he say to you? Endeavor asks. Izuku pauses. He doesn't want to think about it. He said, someone's after his quirk. He said a lot more, but Izuku isn't sure how to talk about that yet. Some of it seemed private. Yeah, Endeavor says, closing his eyes. Did he give it to you? Somehow Endeavor knows of the transferable power. Izuku's not sure how. He was under the impression that it was impossible to give away quirks, and Izuku knows basically everything about quirks. But apparently some underground hero knows of it, along with the number one. No, Izuku lies. He's not sure why. This is Endeavor, the number one pro hero. Alright, Endeavor says, that's not much better. He leans against the wall, clearly thinking. Izuku watches the flames lick Endeavor's face and wonders why he's not in constant fire facial hair pain. The news is here, because this was a pretty big collapse. They're also hoping to get some words from me. Endeavor is an absolute darling from the newscaster's perspectives. Quick, curt and mysterious. Perfect for views and ratings, while not being in any way offensive, but he'll see this recording. And if he sees either of you, covered in blood and claiming to be with him for his last moments. Whoever is after the power knows for a fact that it's transferable. That makes 3. Well, 4 now. He'll come after me, Izuku says. He looks again to Bakugo, face soft in the orange light, and him, he ends up adding. If All Might dies, he'll never stop looking for it. And if he doesn't die, he'll scour every hospital until he can find him, Endeavor says. So he should probably be dead, Izuku says, and Endeavor looks at him. What, you're the number one, you can fake his death. Even if he pulls through, he's underground anyways, so faking his death will probably help his undercover-ness, Izuku says. He's flatter than usual, but he's still rambling a bit. It's better for All Might's safety. And whatever hospital he ends up at. But not your safety, Endeavor says, I'm not faking his death. Hopefully he'll focus on the hospitals for now. Izuku squats down, trying to think. The numbness hasn't fully retreated, but he knows what to do with his thoughts when he can't do anything else. When he was younger and got more easily overwhelmed, he'd remember the last fight he had seen and thought about what he would do better. So he does that now, considering a plan. Some way that protects All Might and Izuku. And protect the lie he told. You tell the news that you were with him when he died, Izuku says, looking up. Endeavor is raising his eyebrow, but he slowly nods after a second. I'll take the fall. He'll come after me, assuming that All Might gave me his quirk. He'll go after Endeavor. Izuku isn't even sure who he is, but with the grimace on Endeavor's face, he can't be good. Wait, that's not I'm so sorry. Hey, Endeavor asserts, it's a good plan. It's smart. Izuku feels his face flush, and he stands up. I'll have to clean off the blood. Endeavor nods, digging out a random cloth from his side pocket. Apparently he carries around napkins. It has his face printed in the corner. Izuku almost tucks it away without using it, but his self-preservation outweighs his idolization. Barely. He tucks the napkin in his pocket after he uses it anyways. He follows Endeavor out of the sewers, finding a fallen collection of rocks that work well enough as a way to get out of the pit and back on the main road. Izuku still feels weak, his knees shaking as he climbs up the hill of rocks. Hell, he'd still struggle even from the first attack. The crowd is still there, either with umbrellas or under awnings of nearby buildings, looking with fascination. Endeavor waves over a couple paramedics, but puts Bakugo down and leaves before the pair arrive. He walks over to where the blue and red lights of the police are lighting up the wet cobblestone. He stops in front of a short-haired man with an oversized police rain jacket and begins a conversation. How you feeling? A woman with white hair in uniform asks, and Izuku has to tear his eyes away from the burning image of the pro hero. He turns to the woman. Can I call my mom? She smiles, gently leading him away from Bakugo, where the other EMT is checking for external injuries. He wants to stay, but he can't make his body follow his own instructions, so he follows her gentle touch to the bright white interior of the ambulance. He's given a silvery blanket and sits on the bench on the side of the ambulance. Another worker begins to check his eyes with a flashlight before nodding. His cuts are checked and cleaned as Bakugo is wheeled in, still looking surprisingly peaceful. They close the door and start the blaring lights and sounds, pulling through the crowd and onto the street. Izuku watches from the rain-coated window as Endeavor makes his way to the news reporters, talking with his head bowed low. Izuku will have to check up on the video later, but for now, he turns back to Bakugo. Still sleeping, being checked up on by the EMT workers, bandaged where they can help. They're quietly discussing his injuries. A concussion for sure, which is probably what caused the whole unconscious thing. Izuku tilts his head back. His hands are still bloody, and his leg is aching from the cut. He can't feel some of his toes, unless he tries to move them, and then he really feels them. His head still hurts, but less now. His pinky is still bleeding. He could reach over to Bakugo. He'd get some weird stares, but he'd definitely be able to find a way to get some blood in Bakugo's mouth. Pretend they're friends and caress his face or something. Embarrassing, but easy. And then All Might's last request would be fulfilled. And the furious surge of power that's swirling inside of him would be quieted forever. Why did he lie to Endeavor? He said he didn't get the power. That All Might still had it, kept somewhere in the body of a dying man. All Might had said it was too dangerous for Izuku to use it. He wasn't physically strong enough to use it and someone would come after him. But now, that someone is going to go after Endeavor. Izuku is safe with it. And he can become strong enough to use it. No one has to know that he still has it. Not Endeavor, not Bakugo, and not All Might. He curls his hand into a fist, turning away from Bakugo, who's sleeping peacefully through the concussion. Blood trickles down his arm from his finger. What would Endeavor do? He wouldn't let someone like Bakugo get a power this vast. Would he? Izuku fiddles with the damp sticker in his pocket. It's become nothing more than a mass of mushy paper. Who tells someone to kill themselves? Someone who probably shouldn't be tasked with this kind of power. Not yet at least. The ambulance rolls to a stop in front of the hospital, and Izuku realizes that he's come to his conclusion. He will fulfill his promise to All Might, and give this power to Bakugo. Just, not yet. Izuku knows that Bakugo has good intentions and a good heart. Deep down, Izuku knows that the reason people strive for heroism is the safety of the population. The money and fame might help, but people only risk their own lives for the safety of others. It's the same with Bakugo, which means he's got a good heart. But until Bakugo shows he can be responsible and not tell his peers to kill themselves, Izuku will keep it as safe as he can. And in the time being, he trains himself enough to use this swirling power. Well then, he's just being proactive. Chapter text. Hero costumes page. A dramatic bitch. Get ready folks, this'll be a long one. The commercialization of hero fashion. Extravagant versus practicality, an online essay by a former fashion consultant for the Midnight Agency. Word count. 6088. Stop now if you're not committed. Let's be real though, most of you are. Heroes, as an implementation of our society, are quite new in the grand scheme of time. There were and still many differences between then and now of course, but one aspect especially caught my eye: hero costumes. Before, they were made to be as practical as possible. Now it's all about glamour and catching attention. As they say in the biz, flashy suits for flashy heroes. In this essay I strive to bring one topic into question. Could it be that the flashier the suits get, the more dangerous the streets become? It has always been a dream of mine. Dinostin. Holy shit, why in the hell is this so long? Good points though. I was sorta intrigued on getting insider information on this sort of stuff, and you delivered pretty well. You could cut down on the life story though, tbh. Bastion of Intel. This is so awesome, great read. Hip hip hooray. Hey, I'm actually writing my thesis on this, can I cite you? His mom called a cab, and now they're both driving home from the hospital. They had let him shower there, but the water was lukewarm and he still feels dirty. Plus the soap makes him smell like a hospital. Everything feels wrong, only enhanced by whatever power he just inherited. The power he's borrowing. So worried, his mom is saying, waving her hands about, breaking him out of his thoughts. Izuku doesn't get to be in a car very often, and it smells stale. It's a short drive, but Izuku is itching to get home anyways. I know Mom, Izuku says, smiling despite it all, but everything was fine in the end. It wasn't, and won't be for a very long time, but his mom doesn't have to know that. Someone died, Izuku, his mom frets. Apparently Endeavor was able to convince the press that, yes, All Might did in fact die. I was so worried when I heard that. And so close to your school too. You didn't see anything, right? No Mom, Izuku says, not even wincing at the lie. And the memories are too fresh in his mind. They will be forever. The doctors had made sure to give him a number for a crisis counselor that Izuku had thrown away as quickly as he could. He just wants to sleep and forget any of this ever happened. He just needs to know if All Might will survive. Izuku might never know at this point. He has no way of reaching out to Endeavor. They get home, Izuku's mom worrying him up the stairs to their apartment and at the door, hugging him until he stops breathing. For the 4th time since she's gotten him from the hospital. He brushes his teeth 5 times, and showers for over an hour, the water as hot as he possibly can get without burning his skin. He leaves all the lights on, hazy through the curtain. There are thoughts passing through his head as fast and frantic as the water hitting his skull. Once he's dressed, he sits on the bathroom floor, window open to help the steam escape. His phone is broken, but he brought his school bag inside, and despite the rain, his laptop still turns on. He has to know. He watches the interview, a group of rain-soaked civilians gawking as Endeavor speaks. You got here very fast, the interviewer, a pretty pink-haired woman says. How is that possible? I had a bit of help from an outside source. A colleague of mine. Another hero. Yes, Endeavor says. He doesn't elaborate on that point. He doesn't mention the fact that All Might was an underground hero. He was killed by the debris. There's a reporter blinks a couple of times before recomposing herself. A hero died tonight. Yes, he says, I was there. I made sure he was comfort. I don't want to talk about this. All gruffness, cut off and simple. He won't talk about what he doesn't want to talk about. Wow, well, I must say I'm surprised. Do we get the name of this hero, Endeavor? Wait for the reports, Endeavor says, frowning at the less than sensitive question. Now if you'll excuse me. He walks towards the camera, and then past it. Interview over. Izuku closes the tab and opens another. HeroLog.org is excited tonight, as there was an Endeavor interview and he said more than he usually does. The first thing Izuku sees, despite the Black Morning theme that happens every time a hero dies, is an oversaturated edit of Endeavor, under the dark umbrella, with a bunch of hearts drawn on. That's commonplace, so Izuku scrolls on. He ignores the comments about how brave Endeavor was, about how kind it was to stay next to a man in his dying moments despite the falling sewers around them. Izuku ignores this too, deciding that the Endeavor fans are going to be useless to him, instead going to a page he hasn't been on for a long time. There's only been one new post since the shitty blonde person meme from earlier today. It's from the same user that offered Izuku the position of moderator, the same one he got into a 5-page argument with. Red_Might is an enthusiastic moderator for this page, and someone Izuku might consider an internet acquaintance. Chapter text. All Might page. Mod Red_Might. Unknown hero killed in the Endeavor versus Sludge villain fight, possibly due to the explosions which. Article tonight. I'm worried. Latte soup. Just saw the obituary for All Might and ran to this page. He seemed like an incredible man. I'm so sorry. The gallows. I can't believe I didn't know this man existed until today. And now I have to watch his videos knowing that I was too late. Amok time. Less than 3 less than 3 less than 3. Fenson Pro. From love to our page to yours. We're so sorry for your loss. Red_Riot. At Red_Might. Hey lol saw this trending, and IDK really what it's about but username twins. 10 months later. Izuku shouldn't take this test. It doesn't matter what his mom told him this morning over breakfast, his favorite are all the reassurances from the people on the UA page. Izuku is not, and never will be, able to pass this test. That's what he's determined after hours of research. The written test should be easy enough, 4 sections of fill-in-the-blank questions. Challenging, but not impossible. But that's never been the daunting part of the plan to get into UA. The scariest part is the next phase. For the support course, at least, it requires a full portfolio of his support creations. Instead, he has a PDF document containing over 100 fully researched heroes. He has to convince the interviewer to take him in on the pretense of analysis, a situation that, to Izuku's knowledge, has never happened before. At least he doesn't have to take the physical test. Even if he has this power, the daunting pit within him, he knows that it's stupid to try and get into the hero course. It's not a permanent ability, and he's not going to waste the opportunity to learn from the support course. He's determined, over these past months, that the power has to be a reserve, a just-in-case scenario. It's unfair if he goes to Gran Torino, the hero that All Might tried to recommend Bakugo go to, and it's unfair if he uses the ability to go into the pro hero course. It would be disrespectful. Izuku is currently staring up at the gleaming buildings of the school, impossibly searching within himself to keep moving. His feet are stuck planted to the ground, his hand in a death grip on his backpack. Why'd he even bring his backpack? No one else brought one. The buildings are beautiful, made of clear glass and surrounded by gardens maintained by someone who probably has a plant-specific quirk. It's winter, but the gardens are still somehow well presented. Dead leaves and branches have never looked better. There are also banners hung up for the applicants, pink and purple, fluttering in the wind. It's a nice day. Izuku is stalling. He takes a step forward, his nerves still bunched up inside of his throat, the cold air not helping with his discomfort. He forgot to grab a coat. He takes another step, and then another, and soon enough, Izuku is walking like a normal person, which is an achievement as its own. There's a crowd of students, all here to take this test. People are barely talking to each other. There are a couple of students walking in as pairs, or waving to others that they recognize. Most kids will probably recognize someone from their own middle school, so they're not all strangers, but there's still a whole nervous energy about the place. And then, for Izuku, the energy gets shattered from nervous to outright panic. Because Bakugo is there, walking towards the building like it's nothing at all, hands in his pockets and looking ahead. His confidence plummets straight into arrogance, eyes only for UA. And Izuku, when he finally notices him. They haven't spoken since the day that Izuku's life changed. Izuku didn't visit him in the hospital, he's not that hopeless, and he had expected life to go back to relative normalcy vis-a-vis their relationship. Sure, Izuku had saved him, but that shouldn't matter to someone like Bakugo, someone who's that callous. Everything should have stayed exactly the same. But it hadn't. Bakugo had skipped almost a week of school recovering from the incident, and when he had returned, he hadn't even looked at Izuku. He had been quieter for a couple of months, but that had worn off. Everything was the same, except whenever Izuku caught Bakugo's eye, he just scowled. No harassment or bullying, just a glare and the silent treatment. Which was, in the long run, better than the alternative. The final year of middle school hadn't been as nightmarish as the other two. But it had been incredibly disconcerting. Izuku, caught up in his own head, thoughtlessly waves, like they're still both 5. Bakugo stops in his tracks, staring at him with another one of those glares. He considers for just a second, before stalking across the large cobblestone pathway that leads to the school, ignoring the students that he cuts off and the curses that they throw his way. He grabs Izuku by the upper arm with an iron grip. There's an explosion building underneath that hand, the heat almost painful. "I owe you nothing, and you're not going to pass this test," he spits. "Deku, I swear that if you don't stay out of my way, I won't hesitate to crush you." Izuku raises his hands in a defensive posture, trying to make himself small again, just like how it was. He'd taken this last year for granted, the months of silence. The months of peace. He suddenly remembers how bad this feeling is, all those years in school and the constant presence of Bakugo. The suffocation, the bullying, Hey, do you know where the test is taking place? Someone asks. Izuku finds a girl a couple paces away. The scene must look casual enough for someone to interrupt. Bakugo lets go of Izuku's arm with a huff, and leaves without another word. She continues, I mean, obviously in UA, but like, which hall? There's a second of silence, the girl staring at him with a smile. She's got chin-length brown hair and her cheeks are flushed red in the cold. Oh, I think they're holding it in the theater. Thanks. She beams, her gaze following Bakugo. She turns back to Izuku with her hand on her cheek, and her head tilted, but are you alright? 'Cause who does that, really? I'm fine, Izuku says, trying not to be too surprised at her concern. She probably didn't even actually need instructions, he's not usually that bad. He doesn't know why he says it. He's always that bad, and often, he's worse. Well, he wasn't very nice to you, she says, smiling again, before transferring her bag to her other arm and holding out her hand, so for now, I think I'll steer clear. Uraraka Ochako. Izuku shakes her hand, knowing that his palm is too sweaty to be normal in this kind of weather. Or any kind of weather really. Oh god, he's shaking hands with a girl. Midoriya Izuku, Izuku says after a second too long. He called you Deku though, she says, pointing back to where Bakugo stormed off. Yeah, he says, looking down to his shoes, it's a nickname. The final standing relic of their friendship. Like a treaty that neither of them can break in the middle of a bloody rivalry. I like it, she smiles, it makes you sound cool. Oh, thanks, Izuku isn't sure what to say next, so, you can use it if you'd like. He inwardly cringes. You're not supposed to force nicknames, especially on girls you've just met. Oh awesome, she nods, and then motions towards the school, come on, we'll look cool if we pretend we already know each other. They walk together towards the school. Uraraka, apparently, knows how to talk about basically anything with a friendly demeanor and enough hand gestures to compensate for the fact that half of the conversation party isn't contributing because of his inherent fear of girls. Izuku learns all about Uraraka finding a pile of kittens in her window flower box and how much time it took to rehome all of them, 14 hours. He also learns about her favorite food, mochi, the name of her favorite kitten she found, Mochi, and finally, her favorite music genre, jazz. They enter into the main hall, turned into a very big waiting room, tables scattered about everywhere and a water station in the corner with cookies. There's a mass of students loitering in the main hall, the test not starting for another 20 minutes. In the warmth of the school, it's easier to relax, and many of the students have begun to actually communicate with one another. A collection of almost 1,000 students, according to the average statistics, all congregating in the school that they all hope to go to, all making light conversation and fogging up the windows. It's like the sound of 100 buzzing flies in this central hall. The acceptance rate of UA is abysmal, but after the first test, it becomes a very real prospect. Which, technically, Izuku is about to enter into the second phase of the test. The first one was a packet of information that he had to gather for the judges, from his grades to his quirk to his social security card. He also had to write a 6-page essay about why he wants to be a hero, proofread and edited by his mom. At the current stage, the acceptance rate is about 20%, and Izuku does not have high hopes at all. They wait at a small fold-out table, Izuku sitting down and sending his mom a text to let her know that he's arrived safe and sound. Uraraka hops up on the table and sits cross-legged. She pulls out her phone, a pink flip phone with cloud stickers, and holds it out to Izuku. It's a place to put in his number. He can't help the heat rising to his face as he grabs her phone. No one's ever asked for his contact information before. In a couple of minutes, and after Uraraka had grabbed 4 cookies to split between the two of them, there's the sound of a bell, ringing out through the hallway. It's a clamoring mess to get through the hall and into the main theater. Izuku is impressed that no one gets trampled. Someone's going to get hurt, someone says from the side, and Izuku can barely make out their face. Here, Uraraka says, grabbing his arm to make sure they don't get separated. They navigate the crowd together, eventually making it to the big wooden doors, propped open with two men navigating people through. As they walk through, there are faculty handing out slips of paper. The auditorium is dark, the pathways lit like a theater and the ceiling exposed. He squints, and realizes this is just a theater, orchestra pit included. The stage is wood, and the curtains are heavy and red. God, he can't imagine any of these classes of UA performing Shakespeare. He looks down at his slip of paper. It's a seat number. Uraraka looks at hers, and then shows him. It's 3 rows down. My guess is so friends don't sit next to each other, Izuku says under his breath. I'll aim, Uraraka says, hearing him despite his whispering, blocking her eyes from the bright stage lights. Here, I'll walk you to your seat. Izuku has no idea why this girl has been so nice, but he nods. He's not going to squander his first high school opportunity for friendship. He bitterly thinks about middle school, and the fearful looks whenever he talked to anyone else. Even associating with Izuku made his fellow classmates targets. It's not entirely a disaster once they're walking through the aisles, much of the crowd forming into lines through the seats. It seems that even if the seats are separate from one another, there's some kind of organization. Uraraka finds the aisle first, and waves Izuku off. Good luck. You too, he says, nodding at her. He really does hope she gets in, even if they're probably going to be in different courses. He doesn't know her power, but she has the confidence of someone who could be a hero. The strength. He squeezes past people, who stand for him as he moves past. He pauses as he sees Bakugo, for the second time, lounging in his seat. The seat right next to Izuku's. Of all the people, he sits down, immediately looking down to his lap and ignoring everything else. Instead of the curses and threats he was expecting, Bakugo stands up, shouldering his bag, and walking straight past. No comments at all. Izuku breathes out a sigh of relief. He watches as he leaves, making sure that he's not just leaving to get enough distance for a long-ranged attack. Instead, he watches as Bakugo finds Uraraka, who's loitered at the end of the row, trying to find her seat. He holds out his slip of paper and says something quiet and probably kind of mean. Uraraka smiles at him, handing him her paper and taking his. She waves it at Izuku as Bakugo walks past her. They've switched seats. At least that's one crisis averted. The curtains begin opening, and the auditorium almost immediately silences. Uraraka pauses her tip-tapping on the fold-out desk. The past 10 minutes have been a silent break from the both of them, too nervous to try and strike up another conversation. Izuku thinks back to the kitten rambling from her earlier, and realizes she might have been nervous this entire time. Ready? She asks, and Izuku can't find it within himself to do much other than nod. The curtain opens the rest of the way, revealing an inflatable projector screen. The stage is completely empty, waxed to shiny perfection, and Izuku strains his neck to see if there's anyone on the side of the stage. He knows the teachers, but he's not sure who's going to be in charge of the instructions. A man knee slides onto the stage. He comes from the left, head lowered and microphone raised above his head as he slides across the floor. He squeaks to a slow stop. And then the music starts. Oh my god, Uraraka asks, eyes wide and gleaming. Izuku takes a photo, phone already taken out the second he saw the stupidest hairstyle known to man. His mom is going to be so jealous. Izuku is the biggest fan of Endeavor in the entire country of Japan, but his mom has been a fan of Present Mike and his stupid hair for years and years. When he was just getting into Heroes, he had downloaded and printed out pictures of the pros to show to his mom whenever he found one he thought looked cool. She would sometimes laminate the pictures and hang them up in his room. Eventually, that had led her to putting on the Hero radio when he got home from kindergarten. Whenever he had asked who her favorite was, she had claimed, the man on the radio. Izuku had printed out a picture of him and hung him up in one of the cabinets. It had made his mom laugh so hard she had cried. Are we ready? Present Mike has started to talk. Well, no, he's definitely yelling. He's still on the floor, like it's an intimate moment in a concert. The music is slowly turned down and he continues, to take a fill-in-the-blank test. Present Mike stands up with a useless hair toss, a glittering smile, and then throws the microphone back from where he came from. Izuku cringes at the clattering noise. Izuku knows that this man doesn't need a microphone. He is one. That means the microphone was a prop. Oh my god, Uraraka asks again, and someone shushes her from a row down. Izuku starts to take notes. He does that when he's nervous. Welcome to UA, the test at least. The screen behind him lights up from an above-head projector. Can they not afford a TV? Izuku mutters, jotting down a bullet point. Uraraka, beside him, bursts into laughter. It wasn't a joke, but he's glad she laughed anyway. Seriously, she says, Izuku is going to have to get used to someone overhearing all his little comments. Or maybe everyone has always overheard him. They just didn't really care. He finds this new experience to be really jarring. Uraraka continues, who uses a projector? Don't they have hologram tech? Maybe they're going for a more retro feel, Izuku says, trailing off to focus again on the man on the stage. Present Mike has now gone on to more personal introduction, like how it's very impressive that they even made it this far and how proud everyone's parents should be. The underlying comment is, don't be too sad when we end up rejecting you. Despite the platitudes, the room is full of tension anyways. The pressure is increasing as the man rambles on, walking back and forth across the stage and pointing to the projector when necessary. Izuku feels it too, his nerves tangled all in a pile. After the written portion, which is being handed out right now, you will need to mark down which course you're trying to get into. There are 4 possibilities. Present Mike holds out 4 fingers in front of himself like he's doing a peace sign. 4. Uraraka asks, almost right on cue. Present Mike continues, 1. Marketing. You people will stay here after the test, since this is the largest room in UA. 2 is the hero course. That group will go to the front and find the 5 buses after the test. They'll take you to the appropriate location. Which sounds to Izuku that the hero course students are certainly going to get murdered in the woods. Present Mike points on the projected map to where they're going to be shuttled to, so hopefully they'll be alright. Then is the support course. You will go to the East Wing and find classrooms 20 to 30. Last, general education. Just mark the appropriate check after taking the test and go home. Also make sure to only fill out section 4 of the test. Lucky. Izuku is all tense even after hearing the name of the support course. The terror at that test, the portfolio and short presentation he'll have to give, it's giving him a stress headache. He can't think about the mention of the hero course. It hurts too much. Man, that's far, Uraraka says, squinting at the map that's now been projected. All 3 secondary tests are marked, and Izuku has to search for a second before finding where they all are. The farthest one is the hero course, by far. It seems to be taking place in some warehouse. You want to be a pro? Izuku asks, turning a little in his seat to look at her. Apparently he'll have to talk about it anyways. That's what I'm hoping for. Uraraka sort of shrugs, a bit of the enthusiasm gone. It's like she's trying to be nonchalant. What's your quirk? Izuku asks, leaning a bit forward. He can help her. If he knows her power, he'll be able to encourage her, see how far she could get with it, maybe recommend a strategy for the test. I can try and see how likely you might be to get into UA. And if you want, I can try and figure out a good strategy for a test like this. How vague is the power? Surprisingly, the more vague the powers, like speed or something, the less likely people are to get into UA because so many people have quirks like that. But if it's something with a lot of application, like Bastionist for example, that's a higher possibility, as long as you're good with your ability. But if you're here, trying to get into UA, I'll have to assume. She's staring at him, eyebrows slightly raised and eyes wide. He realizes that he's gripping the seat rest with one hand and a pen with the other. There's ink dripping down his arm. He may have broken it. Oh, that's not good. No new friend for Izuku. He puts the pen down and slowly settles back, looking forward, ignoring the fact that he's most certainly blushing. He has to learn to control his rambling. And now I must return to the recommendation test. I trust you'll do your very best. Present Mike gives a big thumbs up and flashes a bright grin. Candidates. It doesn't even matter if Izuku can somehow do the impossible and pass this test. It doesn't matter if he gets perfect grades and becomes the best strategist that the world has to offer. This year is going to be the same as the rest. Sad and friendless. Gravity, Uraraka says. Izuku glances at her. That stare of hers, so overwhelmed just seconds ago, is now determined. I can control gravity. Is that a quirk that a hero might have? A quirk that they might want in this school? Izuku suddenly can't help but hope that they'll both get into this school. He wants someone exactly like her to help with strategies. Someone who's willing to listen. That sounds absolutely perfect. He nods, and she breaks out into a grin. And Izuku tries not to feel the pangs of jealousy. She has the power and the gall to get into the hero course. Hell yeah, she says, clapping her hands together once. Hey, which course are? Have either of you ever taken a standardized test in your lives before? Someone hisses in front of him. He's shadowy in the dark, but he's turned to scold them. It's not usually done with a partner. Sorry, Uraraka whispers. Sometimes it is, Izuku quietly says at the same time. Yeah, if you want to get expelled before the first test is done, sure, cheat with your neighbor, he says with a huff, and then turns back forward. Uraraka looks to Izuku and quietly laughs, covering her mouth. The test is quickly passed out, and the lights are turned on. Oh, ow, someone says, pained, a couple rows away, and yeah, the sudden lights are blinding. It's a large, pink packet with a place for the date and his name. He knows from a frantic session of research for the past week, that this test will contain 4 sections: disaster scenarios, first aid, public relations, and finally, general education. All pulled from a bank of questions that are cycled and kept under wraps. A couple questions had been leaked, and Izuku made sure that he would know exactly how to fill those out just in case they show up again. But now the test is before him, daunting and also bright pink. Uraraka's is blue, indicating that the questions are probably ordered differently. Good luck, Uraraka whispers, just under her breath, and Izuku nods. He doesn't want to risk talking at this point, not when the test is before him. 120 questions, all terribly intimidating and all fill in the blank. Not even a single multiple choice. He grabs his backup pen and pencil, scribbles his name on the front, and opens the packet. 3 hours later, after a parade of noises, from the buzzing lights to the occasional cough to all the general education students leaving, Izuku has finished the last section. That last question was a particularly mean one about stoichiometry. His hands are shaking as he sets down the pencil and goes to the final page. The tremors are mostly from frantically writing for 3 hours, mostly. The last page is a selection of survey questions asking how the test went. He fills the questions with minimal commitment, trying to finish this god-forsaken test so he can at least stand up and stretch. How can we improve your test experience? The test asks. Wrist braces. Izuku writes, smearing the ink as he goes. And then, it's the final question. The real exception, because it is a multiple-choice question. Hero, support, marketing, or general education. Izuku hesitates longer than he should. He has a plan. He's had a plan for years, ever since he learned he was quirkless. That's an 11-year-old plan and one of a strategist. But he still hesitates. And the storm within him rages at the attention. He has a better handle on it, he knows he does. He hasn't been working out with his mom for the past 9 months for nothing. All the training, the hours spent at the gym, and the miles of running. His fastest pace is down to 5 minutes and 30 seconds. He doesn't know how he knows that the power is more in his control, but he does. It feels like if he opened the lid on this ability, he wouldn't explode. Which is probably good. The months of rigorous training had been good. An output. A distraction. Weeks after he saw what he did, and before he found the number that Endeavor had left on the napkin, he had exercised for hours. Pushing himself to his limit and beyond. Injuring and re-injuring the same tendons. Ignoring the fact that he might have watched a man die. 8 months ago, the day had been rainy, lonely and underwhelming. Izuku had finally decided to take the napkin out of the wood frame and had turned it over in his hands, and realized that on the inside of the paper, there was a phone number. It had cleared the problems of the day, seeing the blood-streaked writing. So he had quickly sent a text, with shaking fingers, to ask if All Might had survived. The response was simple, but the words,
he's stable, was enough to start the tears up again. Only after he had learned that All Might had survived, through a small text from Endeavor, was when he had relaxed.
Only after all of that had he even remembered to continue his schoolwork. Why did he do all of that? The hours of exercise, the training, the worrying. Why did he take this power, something that was never rightfully his? Just to go into the support course? Out of the corner of his eye, he sees Uraraka close her work packet. He remembers what All Might said. He had told Izuku to be a pro with all the confidence in the world.
The best way to know when Bakugo is good enough for this power, is to follow him, which means
Izuku, before he can stop himself, crosses off the box that says, Hero Course.
And seals his own fate. Well, mostly seals his fate as someone, who's never in a million years is going to pass the next test. Chapter text. Hero death page. Link from Zelda. So, shouldn't we implement the morning theme for this? Web links. Mod Fenson Pro. I mean, no. She's not dead. Link from Zelda. But it was a villain attack. Mod Fenson Pro. So, we don't implement the theme every time someone retires.
Link from Zelda. She was 20, and won't ever work again because some monster decided to cut off her arms. Mod Fenson Pro. She didn't die. Stop trying to mourn people who aren't dead, she has a whole life ahead of her. Happy days. The girls are fighting GGG, Mod Fenson Pro. Please refrain from jokes like that on this page. Be respectful to those of which die heroically in battle. Nito's mother was worried about this next part. He stands with a small crowd of students, all being herded outside into the warm sunlight. Some of the teachers are here, helping them follow the right directions, making sure they can get to the second phase of the test without a scratch on their little heads. There's a brown field of dead grass that extends past the buildings of UA, the pathways having been hastily turned into some sort of track. It's a foot race, but everyone knows that, and everyone's also prepared for that. It's not what his mother was fretting about.
Yaoyorozu Momo, he asks, locating the girl with sleek black hair and heeled boots that probably cost as much as some people's rent. Not his though, he doesn't pay rent, because he's 15, and he's also incredibly wealthy. He smiles at her, holding out his hand. I didn't realize you'd be here. I could have sworn you were at least a year younger than me. Funny, she takes his hand, and an imagined jolt runs up his arm. I could have sworn that you were the younger one, Mono Manito. Yaoyorozu smiles politely.
He is, by over half a year, and they both know it. That doesn't matter here because they both know what this really is. Posturing and performing, just like all the wealthy hero families. And, luckily for his dear mother and father, he's an excellent performer. Oh, well, I look forward to our cooperation anyways, he says, letting go of her hand. One down.
His mother can worry all she wants. Nito knows how to introduce himself to people. The power of Yaoyorozu's ability, some sort of replication quirk, swirls around in his mind. He doesn't know what it is yet, not entirely, but he'll have it for the next 10 minutes. He starts a timer on his electric stopwatch, an expensive gift from his grandfather. He'll have 3 laps by the end of this little conversation break. Nito finds another student, after a couple of minutes of watching. The 10 students here are antsy, even if they have no right to be. This is the recommendation exam, the test for the elite and talented. As long as you're not completely incompetent, it's practically a shoe into UA.
He scans over the lot of them and adjusts his opinion. Maybe they do have a right to be antsy.
Excuse me, he says, brushing past the one who interested him, a kid built like a mountain with an expression to match. It's enough, and a second power joins the first. He's not entirely sure what it is, but that's half the fun with a quirk like Nito's. Yaoyorozu was planned because he's honestly curious of what her power might be. That information is kept under wraps before UA, but she was also never the main target here.
There are a handful of families with connections to pros, whether that be through management or relation. The top 3 families, in order from least influential to most, are the Iidas, the Yaoyorozes, and finally, the Todorokis.
The Monomasses are far, far below that. His standing is enough for Nito to get into the recommendation exam, but not enough to hold much of a shred of power. At least he's here. The galas, the charity events, the grand openings, the hero funerals, the graduations, all of these are grand networking events that he's been trained in for years and years. Smile here, compliment here, insult here, etc. etc. All the pro families go to these. All but one. Sure, Endeavor occasionally shows up when it pertains to him, but he doesn't bring his children. The kids have barely seen the light of the day, let alone the press. At least those are the rumors. Monoma Nito, Nito says, holding out a hand to the youngest Todoroki. He's taller than Nito expected, incredibly pale, and has a scar on his face. His hair is also bizarre, like Santa's attempt at an emo phase. Todoroki looks at Nito for a second, expression completely and utterly flat. Nito, despite himself, shivers. It's appropriate. The rumor mill points to his powers being more similar to his mother's. Some sort of ice manipulation, maybe. Nito wants to know what it is.
Hello, he finally says, taking Nito's hand and shaking, his face still flat, hand freezing. Monoma. I don't know that name.
The third power jolts through, up his arm. This should be plenty. You will, Nito says, letting a bit of that networking come back, smiling as best he can, I promise. We're going to be peers, you know. And hey, maybe we'll even be friends.
His eyes are still dead, but now there's a hint of a smile, maybe. There's suddenly a horn, which is incredibly loud. Todoroki turns away with barely a flinch, and Nato looks at the source of noise. There's a guy with an air horn, much too close for comfort, just outside the building. Ah geez, the man, one of the teachers, definitely the infamous Present Mike, says, my bad. Anyways, hey, little rich kids. That horn just meant that you have 1 minute until the test.
Nito internally sighs. He wanted more time to figure out Endeavor's little heir. The youngest Todoroki child and the first to go to UA.
Nato takes a step back and looks to the race. He removes his jacket and tosses it to the ground with as much flourish as he can muster. The test is going to be 6 miles. Running through the UA campus with water stalls to help and an ambulance at the ready. All of this had been sent in the packet to his parents, who had signed it without looking. He's positive that they would have sold their own rib cages to get him into this school. He stretches his legs, just for a second. He doesn't really need it if Todoroki's powers are anything like his mother's. Or his father's for that matter. He finds Yaoyorozu's power first and mentally grasps it, trying to tangle it into something tangible. He watches as she forms a complex sort of leg brace from her own hands, just pushing out and a hazy item forming from the air. It seems simple enough. He tries to be subtle, pushing his hands out, and his head goes cloudy. It feels like he's swimming in an ocean at night, with no clear direction of where up is. He puts his hands down. Most of the time, he can figure out the quirks fast. Not this one, apparently, so he scowls and moves on. No use dwelling. The next power, the one from the stranger, feels like he's standing just in front of a TV, the static dragging his skin in. The race starts and the stranger runs off, a blast of wind shooting from his hands and propelling him forward. The wind comes from around Nato, controlled with a flick of his wrist and swirling about him, whipping his clothing and hair. Nato tilts his head and can't help but feel impressed. He's never seen this kid, he's definitely not from one of the elite families. Some random civilian was able to obtain an ability like this. The impressed feeling turns sour in seconds. Nato shakes his head, clearing away the jealousy, because he can certainly use this ability. He'll probably end up better at it than some backwater civilian anyways. He has the unfortunate habit of outperformance. He lets the wind go, falling around him, and lifts his hands for the finally quirk. You're going to want to push back, a voice says from next to him. Nato jumps. The race has already begun. Who's? The Todoroki kid is standing, arms crossed as he watches the other students run into the distance, trailing wind and dust. What? Nato asks. He has a reason for staying behind. He can't run without knowing what he's working with. But the number one's child. My quirk. It's ice, so if you push back with only your right hand, it's like, he pauses, contemplating. Perhaps he's second-guessing telling Nato about his a jetpack. The youngest Todoroki settles on, holding his pointer finger up to the sky, expression completely straight. "Oh," Nato says, grabbing the last power from his head. "This one is indescribably numb." He can't place the feeling, but it's familiar. He pushes out his hand and a column of ice erupts, further cooling the air around him in a sudden burst. The ice glints against the sun with a deadly sharpness. The rumors are apparently correct, because Todoroki inherited his mother's quirk with an increase of power.
He's left with frostbite growing up his fingers, freezing against the winter air. He shakes his hand, but the frost doesn't stop, crawling up his arm, and he has to cease the power entirely. The frost is still there, but he's able to wipe it off on his shirt. Ow.
"Good luck," Todoroki shrugs, and Nato turns back to him. He still hasn't left. Nato opens his mouth to comment, ask how in the world he's planning to get into UA with this strategy, but in the end, he realizes that he really doesn't care. Nato won't follow his example. He takes off in a storm of wind, propelling him forward as he runs. He's not confident enough to let it carry him through the air like the other kid, but either way, with the wind, he's much faster.
He avoids the other powers as he catches up to the stragglers, including, surprisingly, Yaoyorozu, who's running at a good pace but not with anything extraordinary. As he passes her, she conjures up a Gatorade from thin air. Fascinating. He wishes he had more time to study her ability, it would be interesting to use.
He stagnates after a little, caught behind the runners in the front, and barely outpacing those in the back. He's only got 6 more minutes on his watch for each power, so he considers Todoroki's ability. What's a little frostbite in comparison to the halls of UA?
He finds that numbness, Todoroki's power, and pushes his right hand behind him. What a weird ability. He's shot up into the air, feet above the ground, almost like he's flying.
He lands with a flourish of wind, and the illusion is broken.
The second power cushions his fall. He barely caught himself since it takes precious seconds to switch between the powers. He breathes out and keeps running, wiping the frost from his hand again. He looks back up to the crystal blue sky. He wants to go back there again, feel the swoop in his stomach and the wind against his cheeks.
So he does, a couple more times, getting higher and higher, more confident. The feeling is horrible. On the next jump, he tries to use ice again, start the jetpack that Todoroki was talking about. He accidentally uses both hands. A warmth erupts from his left hand. He stops it as fast as he can, stumbling to the ground. He pauses in the road, considering what he just did, a string of smoke curling up into the air.
He stays still, letting one of the stragglers pass him. He looks to his left hand. A drop of water spills down his right hand, the frost melted from the sudden heat in his left side. He starts to laugh, the sound of it echoing off the campus buildings. He finds that he really doesn't care about the strange looks that the fellow racers give him as they pass. He turns, grinning. He can see the start of the race. The Todoroki kid has now decided to sit cross-legged on the ground, repeatedly pulling dead grass from the dirt and scattering it on his lap. He's looking at Nato, head tilted like he asked a question. This kid has a mixture of both of his parents' abilities. Most children take on one ability, maybe with slight variations from their other parent. Nato got most of his from his grandmother, and that much of a genetic dissonance is rare. This kid has a mixture of 2 of the strongest quirk users in the past generation. The Todoroki parents were famous in their schooling years, and the combination of them both has led to one of the most powerful quirks Nito's ever held in his hands. This kid has the potential to be very, very strong. Most of the other contestants have passed, leaving Nito well in second to last place. He starts a fire with his left hand, the smallest candle flame on his finger, smoke rising up in wisps. He has to tear his eyes away from the light to look back at Todoroki. He's still sitting, but he's entirely still, until he starts to shake his head, slow, and new expression on his face. Fear. For some reason, he wants this to be kept a secret. Nato is in second to last place, but he can't help but feel accomplished anyways. Sure, he'll keep Todoroki's secret. For now. He turns to win the race. Oh God, not again. Izuku immediately looks down, breathing hard, hands on the cement, his vision swimming as he stares at the sidewalk. There's another explosion just behind, another one of the large robots crumbling to the whims of a student,
a blast of wind and dust flooding around him. He keeps his focus down. The sidewalk looks like the one outside his mom's apartment, surprisingly accurate for a city square built specifically for this test, with grass growing between the cracked cement. It's not winter here. He's looking down because he can't look at the scene in front of him. It's too similar, too much like Izuku looks back to where he came from, trying to determine if there's a way he can escape this situation. There's a building, one that he's been hunkered down in for the majority of the test so far, small and squat with a robot's corpse now firmly crushing the ceiling. He had barely escaped that, and now he's here. He looks forward, checking to see if that's safe, and he sees it again. There's a body under the rubble, and oh God, really, again. He feels delirious. How did this happen twice? He stays for another second on the cement, considering his options. Whoever it is, they'll probably get rescued after the test, but there's still 6 or so minutes left before the end, and anything could happen in that time. He stands up, because he knows that he can't leave whoever behind. Not again. He can't leave with someone right there. Maybe he can actually do something this time instead of just waiting for a pro. He pushes down the panic and fear and runs over to the body. Who thought it was a good idea to simulate an entire city block? Why aren't there heroes working to keep these kids safe? He rounds the rubble, sneakers squeaking on the pavement as he turns, seeing if the person is even alive. It's Uraraka. She is alive, thank God, trying to move herself from the rubble, her shirt torn, her hair covered in dust, and her hands frantically scrambling, trying to pull herself out of the ton of rocks. The two of them had split up at the beginning of the exam, with a wish of good luck. Working together in this exam isn't entirely prohibited, but Izuku didn't want a girl to see how incompetent he might be. He didn't want to drag her down. He's worked out for almost 9 months now, and that storm keeps getting louder, but he hasn't found an opportunity to use it yet. It's been far too risky this entire test, since he'd have to dodge students and robots alike, and he doesn't even know the extent of this power. What if he hurts someone? But he might not have a choice anymore, because he can't see a way to get her out of the rubble. Funny running into you, she smiles, a little weak but still much too cheery for someone who's gushing blood from 2 cuts on her face. Hi again, he says, rounding the rubble, trying to find a rock he might be able to lift. He finds a medium-sized one, but when he tries to lift it, she yelps in pain as he ends up digging the rock into her stomach. Sorry, he says, falling down, making sure she's still okay. He can't move the rubble, so he has to make sure she's not in immediate danger. She doesn't seem to be too outwardly injured, a couple of scrapes here and there, so he settles down next to her. How's it going for you? I've gotten 28 points, she coughs, maneuvering herself so she's facing upwards, trying to push the rocks off of her from that position. It's not the question he asked, but if she's focused on the arbitrary points, it means she's probably not doing too badly. He saw her take down at least one of the robots. She had run straight up to it, and slapped her palms onto the thing. Its leg had floated for a second before the whole thing had lost balance, crashing to the ground. Have you tried to, gravity lift the rocks? He asks, motioning to her free hands, trying to articulate what her power is. She grimaces a bit. My stomach is killing me. He doesn't know what that means. I can maybe reverse something for a couple of seconds, but then it will just crush me again. How do you replenish your ability? Most pros just have to wait to get back their powers if they expend too much. Any anti-nausea medicine, which I have in my pocket, but I'll also need about 20 minutes for it to work. Ginger is faster, but kinda pricey for how much I need. He grimaces, because the test will be long over by 20 minutes, and either the pros will save her or a stray robot will have crushed her. He pulls at another slab of cement, one that's far enough that he can move it without risking her safety. It's good that he's physically stronger, the aerobics doing their job as he heaves the rock up. He's been working out with his mom and her aerobics class for the past 9 months, and he's gotten very, very good at talking to women in their 50s. He's also a lot stronger, which is nice. The rock shifts, and even feet away, the pile on top of her shifts a bit, and she braces herself. He stops immediately, but nothing else happens. I don't think that's going to work, she coughs, laying down, her hair splayed out against the broken rocks. She's right, of course. This whole thing, it's precarious at best, and if he moves it the wrong way it might topple over and fully crush her. He pauses, walking away and trying to survey the scene. Ideally, she would be able to get herself out of this situation herself, because even using All Might's power, Izuku isn't sure he can figure out a way to delicately extract her.
There's another crumble of debris as the city falls down around them. Izuku turns, expecting another one of those robots to be there, imposing and terrifying and ready to crush anything under its feet. Izuku remembers reading about a death from the tests, 3 years ago. He had dismissed it as an unfortunate accident, a mistake that was easily preventable.
With the explosions all around him, Izuku isn't sure that Uraraka won't be the next victim. Or himself for that matter. He's surprised that there haven't been more deaths. But instead of a robot, he finds another applicant. Jumping down from the debris of the building Izuku was originally in, causing a small avalanche, his eyes set on the three-pointer robot, far enough away that Izuku doesn't feel worried. "Hey!" Izuku yells, standing up as fast as he can and waving both of his hands in the air, "Over here." The kid looks at him, but he doesn't seem to see Uraraka, so he just waves back, a little hesitantly. And then he continues, running down with the gait of an Olympian about to start a marathon. Izuku pauses, frustrated. He tilts his head, because he's pretty sure that the kid's glasses glint off of the sun, and yeah, that's him. Izuku nods, because if his quirk is anything like his family's, this should work. "Iida!" Izuku yells, and the kid, Iida Tenya, second son of the Iida family, slows to a stop. He turns with a more than a little concern, probably for being recognized, like his face isn't publicly posted on at least 3 different wikis. "We need help." Iida pauses, and Izuku almost gives up hope. But he jogs over, eyes ever sharp as he looks around at the scene. Like maybe it's some sort of trap. If Izuku was smarter, and a bit crueler, he might have considered taking out the competition. There are rules against it, but Izuku knows that there are always ways to get around those. "She's in danger," Izuku says, running up and meeting Iida halfway, pointing behind him to Uraraka. Iida's eyes go wide. He doesn't have time to waste. This test still has about 5 minutes left, and that's plenty of time for a robot to kill Uraraka, and I need you to go find someone for me. "You're one of the chatty kids," Iida says, from the test. Izuku realizes that Iida was the one who had scolded him and Uraraka right before the exam started. "Yeah," Izuku nods, blushing easily with embarrassment. "There was a kid, I saw him in the beginning. He seemed to have some sort of tape, I think? Go find him for me. I also need the one with the shadow quirk. The bird student. And find me someone who can defend this area for the next 3 minutes." "I can defend you," Iida says, a little slow, "if you're worried about that." "I'm more worried about internal bruising," Izuku says. "We need to get her out fast, and I can keep her safe for at least a little bit." That's not true in the slightest. For some reason, he's treating this like a real disaster, and sacrificing the next couple of minutes of safety to permanently get her out. "I'll trust you," Iida says, "but this is taking away precious time for M. Go. Fast. Prioritize getting back here over following my instructions, but bring backup," Izuku says, using the voice that his aerobics instructor used whenever he made a mistake. Stern but not too cruel. It feels dumb when he tries to use it, but Iida swiftly nods, does a little bow, and runs off with the speed of a jet plane. He's so fast. Izuku jogs back to Uraraka. She looks like she's in pain, but smiles when he squats down next to her. "You doing all right?" He asks her quietly, like the robots can hear him. Maybe they can, they're new for this year. "I'm like," she says, really embarrassed, mostly. Izuku nods, because yeah, he'd be embarrassed too, and she goes even more pink, covering her eyes. "Sorry," he says. "I just am sorry, but I'm going to vent for a sec. I only get 28 points to begin with, and then I go and get injured. This isn't how a pro would do it, and it's definitely not going to get me into UA." "I think you're being really brave," she snorts. "No really. This is exactly what a pro would do," he says, gesturing to where she had started drawing stars in the dust. She laughs, and Izuku realizes that this is a lot better than the first time he comforted a crushed person. Maybe it's a skill that he can learn. Izuku finally registers what she said earlier, only. "Huh? You only have 28 points? That's what, at least 10 robots?" 15, she says, shrugging. "I went for the smaller ones since they're easier to destroy." I know it's not much, so no need to point it out. 15 robots, he says, amazed. It's too late not to embarrass himself in front of this girl. She's clearly paces and paces ahead of him in every sense. I haven't even gotten one. She looks confused, like that doesn't make sense, which only makes his shame grow more. It was a distant, impossible dream to try and get into this school, and he especially shouldn't have assumed that he'd be able to keep up a friendship with someone, let alone a pretty girl. Here, he says, you keep still. I'll check to see if help is still. There's another crash, directly behind him. Uraraka looks up, terrified, but from her position there's not much she can see. Izuku turns, spotting, finally, what he was truly afraid of seeing. A robot, larger than a building, built with state-of-the-art technology, gleaming under the winter sun and staring directly down at the two of them. These people throw around so much money just to put children in danger. Not good. Uraraka coughs, and Izuku shakes his head. Why hasn't Iida returned with backup? It's only been a couple of minutes, but Izuku knows how fast that family is. The robot crushes a small house, glass shattering, cables snapping as the building collapses. Izuku wonders if this is what it's going to feel like out on the field, him standing between mass disaster and the someone who he's trying to save. In real life, this robot would already have a death count in the hundreds based on the current destruction. He feels the power build beneath his skin, like a suffocating heat, and suddenly he can't breathe. It's like it's screaming to get out, to escape him. Is this how All Might felt at all times? It's exhausting.
Izuku takes a stabilizing step back, squaring his feet and lifting up his fists. He's terrified of what this power might do to him, but he can't let this thing crush him either. He takes a second, looking back to Uraraka, who's closed her eyes, and Izuku finally notices a large injury, blood dripping down one of the pieces of rubble, originated from her shoulder. She really has been incredibly brave through this whole thing. He knows that he'd be crying. He runs forward, power behind each step, although if that's his new quirk or just the adrenaline, he's not sure. He's pretty sure it's the adrenaline. The robot takes another step over buildings, the glass windows shattering from the shock waves when it steps down. Izuku shields his face as shards of glass fall from the building. A glass piece shoots close to him, but he's able to easily dodge. And then it's him against the robot. Standing tall, and Izuku could swear staring down at him. The expression is blank, almost apathetic, but of course it is. It's a robot, it will crush him without hesitation. And then it will crush Uraraka.
The thing moves forward, and Izuku can't help but flinch. He's not sure how to use this. Nothing could have prepared him for attacking this thing. Even if he takes it down, it's not actually worth any points. It's just a distraction, and with so little time left, he knows that he's not going to get the opportunity to kill any other robots. He spent too much of his time analyzing, fascinated by the myriad of quirks that these candidates have used. He is going to fail the test. At least he can still help someone. For the first, and probably only time in his life, he can directly save someone's life. He feels the power building, and he tries to direct it forward, focusing on his hands, preparing to hit the thing in the legs. His hands are on fire as he runs forward, the robot swiveling its head to follow him. He gets to the thing's left foot, bigger than a bus, and pulls his fist back, sweating right before. There's an explosion above him. A halo of light, fire expanding in a quick burst surrounding the robot's head. Izuku scrambles back just in time as the robot kicks up, like a drunk man who was just punched in the head, teetering to the side. The explosion clears in a plume of smoke, and Izuku realizes that the head has been targeted, blackened by soot and spinning slightly. The robot crushes a bridged highway with its hand, stabilizing itself. It spins its head, ignoring Izuku, who begins to scramble back. Standing on a building with his arm raised in front of him and a deadpan expression, is Bakugo. The robot swings a fist, like Bakugo is some annoying fly, and he expertly dodges, jumping off one building and onto the next. He shoots off another explosion, from a distance, and it lands directly on the thing's chest. He moves to a domed roof. Izuku has barely ever seen Bakugo use long-range explosions. He didn't know he could aim that well. The robot lunges forward with the weight of a mountain, grabbing onto the bank like it's made of paper match, crushing the domed roof with its fists. Izuku watches in horror as the dust clears, the power building again, but Bakugo, like some sort of rocket, shoots out from the smoke, rising into the air, using his quirk like a jetpack. Izuku pauses his retreat, staring upwards. He's certainly unfamiliar with the long-range explosions, but he's never seen Bakugo fly. He shoots forward, landing directly on the thing, and apparently finding some sort of chink in the armor, puts his hand over a seam and shoots off a series of explosions. The robot alights from the inside. A silhouette of the internal craftsmanship of the thing alights as everything is turned to ash and fire. Bakugo jumps backwards, landing carefully on a building, steadying himself. Then he simply walks away, out of range of vision. Izuku stares, dropping his fists to his sides as the power drains like a deflating hot air balloon. That robot wasn't worth anything. It was just a distraction. Destroying it did nothing for Bakugo. The robot falls with a ground-shaking crash, demolishing another 3 buildings, and Izuku barely finds it within himself to move completely backwards, sitting down without a thought next to Uraraka. He's still staring at where Bakugo just was, where he had just been silhouetted against the plexiglass sky. Huh, Uraraka breathes out, seemingly as dumbfounded as Izuku feels. That was cool. It always is, Izuku says. But why did it happen?
What force in the world would have Bakugo helping a random trapped girl? Helping Izuku, he feels a spike of panic as he considers his own choices. He said he'd return the power if Bakugo ever improved as a person, and this was a perfectly selfless act. An act of a true hero.
Izuku squeezes his knees, curling up into himself a little bit, considering his next action and the possibility that he might have done all of this work for nothing. He might have to return to a quirkless kid before the day is up. He begins to draw Endeavor in the dirt next to Uraraka's stars. The flying was so cool. I didn't even think that was possible with something like that, Uraraka says, still considering, and Izuku pauses. Because that flying wasn't a normal part of his fighting strategy. Izuku's watched him in a couple of semi-pro MMA quirk fights for middle schoolers, and his strategy was always to get in the person's face as quick as possible and then go for the eyes. Flying was never a part of it. Even if he was trapped somehow, caged in a corner by another student, he never tried to go upwards. A movement catches his eye, and Izuku turns to the side, his head still resting on his knee. Maybe it's another robot and he'll have to see Bakugo be heroic again. Instead, he sees a person in the shadows. Izuku stops tracing his fingers through the dirt, staring at the kid, tall for his age but certainly still a candidate. He's wearing rumpled clothes, clean despite the city falling around him. His purple hair looks like he just woke up from the longest nap of his life.
His appearance is haggard, but his expression is relatively neutral when he finds Izuku staring at him. He doesn't seem to be afraid at all. There's a second of mutual silence.
The kid begins to slink away before pausing, surveying the scene in front of him one last time. He almost seems smug, if that little smile means anything. He makes eye contact again, and then gives a lazy 2-finger salute.
Over here, Iida says, and Izuku finds him with a small group of students, including the ones Izuku asked for. He sighs, relaxing a bit at the oncoming rescue, and putting everything else to the side. Uraraka squeezes his hand once before straining herself so she can see the party coming over. Izuku stands and waves. There are a couple minutes left for the exam, and Uraraka is going to be fine. That's all Izuku could have ever hoped for at this point. Tamura hates this street. Sure, maybe he lives here, but that doesn't have to stop him from hating it. The crowd, the people, his hands cooking in gloves that are so tailored that they've become almost like a second, very sweaty, skin. It's like everyone got together and created a perfect hell for him. He barely avoids brushing past a businessman who's chatting loudly on the phone, and considers the death of all humanity. They're not entirely unrelated. He scratches his neck. Next is a woman with a young child, who's talking excitedly, showing her something, which means Tamura has to give them more and more space as the child begins to wave his arms around. Tamura curls his hands into fists, the leather creaking in his coat pockets. The coat is a nice one, black and sturdy with a comfortable plaid lining. The gloves too, warm in the winter cold, and bought full price at a luxury store. Everything he wears is nice, but it all feels like saran wrap against his body, overly hot and suffocating, tighter with each step that he takes. But the walking is important. Apparently, it helps to clear out his head and give him fresh air. Apparently, he wishes he was expensed a car. Then the brushes of humanity would only occur through layers and layers of metal and plastic. It would almost be tolerable. Someone laughs, loud and boisterous, a tourist in the middle of the city square, and Tamura considers killing them in particular. It wouldn't be productive, even if he thinks that everyone would probably let him get away with it. He would probably be exalted as a hero, considering the subtle glares that the other people are giving the group of college-age students. That would be another reason to end their existence. Finals are coming up, and it would basically be a mercy. He slips between two crowds of people, lucky enough not to brush either. He's getting close, the streets becoming less populated, the buildings becoming lower. He hates where he lives, the center of all things, the middle square of this godforsaken city. It's inevitable that he must see people every time he leaves. But finally, he's escaped the confines of the busy street. Maybe one day he'll burn the offices to the ground and run into the mountains. That way he'd only have to see squirrels and deer. But without access to the internet, he'd probably end up going insane, which would be an inconvenience. He better stay here for now. He finds the dark street, lit by nothing but the light-polluted sky and the moon. The road is covered in weeks-old trash and debris, crowding into corners and making very cold houses for rats and pigeons. The cleanup crews aren't as diligent about this particular alleyway, and there had been an intensive pro-fight just a week ago. The street is thankfully empty, so Tamura feels himself relax considerably. The bar is just ahead, a written sign on the front offering outrageous prices for drinks. It's been enough to distract most traffic over the past years. Occasionally the very wealthy will find the bar and assume it's some avant-garde place, and then try to peacock around their credit cards and tips. They never stay for long, because really, the alcohol isn't very good. He walks over a broken window, his shoes crunching in the glass and snow, nearer to the black wooden door that leads to the musty bar. Tonight he has good news. For once, he reaches for the door handle, but is forced to pause due to the sharp press of a blade against his back. Apparently the alley wasn't as empty as Tamura wished. "Don't move," the man growls, confident like it's his only lifeline, because even as he says it, the knife shakes. Tamura turns his head slightly, and the knife digs deeper. He just wants to see his assailant. An older gentleman, with a scraggly graying beard and a light jacket, says, "Give me everything you have." He seems to only be a simple mugger. Which is better than the alternative? Tamura steps forward, towards the door, the pressure of the knife leaving his back. He opens the door, ignoring the man's sputtering. He doesn't have time to deal with this tonight, not after the good news. "I was talking to you," the man says, harshly grabbing at Tamura's arm. Even through the coat jacket, even through the layers of leather and plaid and cotton, he can suddenly feel the sickness of human touch. The heat and horror, spreading down his arm like dirty water, running in rivulets. He shivers, full body, the nausea immediately crowding up in his throat. That's the first time someone touched him in months, and Tamura finds that his thoughts haven't changed much about the whole experience. He shudders again, trying to find it within himself not to throw up all over himself. The man steps back, like Tamura has a bomb he didn't notice, looking a little afraid at the reaction. Tamura, curled in on himself, throws his left glove to the ground, because really, enough is enough, isn't it?
"I didn't," the mugger says, but Tamura doesn't even want to give him that. He takes the man's clothed shoulder, halting him where he stands. As he holds onto the man, a pressure spreads up through his hand, because even if it's better when he initiates physical contact, he can still feel it. So, to get the experience over as fast as possible, he reaches out with his ungloved hand, grabbing the man's arm, and makes deliberate eye contact. He likes to see this next part. It's like wet paper, disintegrating easily under the grip of Tamura's crushing hand. The mugger's wrist dissolves as easily as a clump of ash, and even as begins to scream, Tamura doesn't let go. Tamura closes the door behind him, the warmth of the bar quickly overcoming the winter chill that he brought in with him. He hangs up the coat on the black metal rack that was recently installed. It really is a well-built bar, more of a lounge than anything, with smooth wood and dark fabrics.
It almost completely plays the part of a rich man's bar, only the poor alcohol gives it away. It's like something you'd expect to find out in the middle of the busiest streets, but instead it's here, and Tamura is eternally grateful for that fact. What wine do you have? Tamura asks, sliding into a seat and resting his elbow on the bar. Kurogiri is staring at him, cleaning a beer stein. Tamura is pretty sure that he's always cleaning some glass just so he has something to do with his hands.
Did you kill someone? Kurogiri asks, putting down the glass and fishing out a bottle and 2 wine glasses. I heard someone screaming.
Tamura grimaces, looking down to his sleeves. The shirt is gray just in case, but there aren't any flakes of the man on his shirt. He's gotten good at avoiding that. I didn't kill him. I just needed a hand.
Shigaraki. Was that a pun? Bad. Very. Tamura sighs, grabbing the wine glass that Kurogiri slides across the bar. It's red and cool to the touch, so Tamura gladly gulps it down.
Just the hand, Kurogiri muses, tapping his fingers on the countertop. Your control is getting better.
Tamura rolls his eyes and doesn't dignify that comment with a response. He takes another sip. People scream in this city all the time, he eventually says. Why do you think it was me? Well, first, it's you. And second, you look very pleased with yourself, he says, and Tamura shrugs. He's let Kurogiri believe whatever he wants over the years. A recklessly violent sadist is close enough to the truth that Tamura doesn't need to correct him. He's never been able to shake his little habit of enjoying others' pain. Honestly, the only wrong word in that assumption is the reckless part.
But he hasn't been kicked out yet, so he'll let the man see him as he wants. I am pleased, he smiles against the lip of the cup, the wine sharp on his tongue as he finishes off the glass. Kurogiri raises an eyebrow in question, though how Tamura can parse that out, he's not entirely sure. The man is mostly shadow and only has the suggestion of a face, but the expressions are always there. Well, don't leave me hanging all night. What's got you smiling like that? Did you get a girl's number or something? Tamura snorts at the joke, laying his hands down onto the smooth top of the bar, gloved yet again, even though he probably couldn't hurt Kurogiri if he tried, and smiles. He agreed to the plan. There's a second of silence, and Tamura only briefly glances at Kurogiri. He's paused entirely, but that quickly turns to a broad smile. I knew he'd cave, Kurogiri nods, it's smart. That's enough praise from the man that Tamura feels another wave of confidence. It's going to work. The plan is smart, the situation is perfect, everything is falling into place. He finally has the resources and support he's needed. He can finally, prove that All Might is still alive. Chapter text. Endeavor page. HeroPro_69. Just read an article about the verbal harassment case at Front Falls Agency. Do we know if there's any documented evidence about Endeavor's treatment of his employees? I don't want to have my fav cancelled again lol. Lichenlicker. Don't worry at all. Everyone who's been asked to comment about it have only had positives for his agency. All of the heroes from it have talked about how professional he is. HeroPro_69. Phew. Thanks folded hands. Rookie UPLSPLSPLSPLS. My second cousin worked at his agency as a secretary and said that he was always super nice. He even had a card sent to her when she went on maternity leave. Lichenlicker. Coming back to comment again because I gotta add something. This was from like 5 years ago, so a lot of people forgot about it, but these posts will probably give you all the proof you need that Endeavor's chill as hell. Just Google the daily life of an Endeavor agency intern. You'll find it in an archived post on here. It's pretty funny. And I think there was enough evidence to prove that it was real. Umbrella down. TDLOAEAI. The TDLOAEAI. You mean the posts that got this site on the map? I'm pretty sure those were as culturally important as like The Big Bang, straight up. I still reread those when I'm in a depressive episode. Ochako is more nervous than she has the right to be. She's sitting in a plastic chair, tapping her shoe against the linoleum floors and waiting for the lovely security woman to call her into the office. It's occupied right now, the office closed with only the faintest sound of voices. She taps out a text to her dad, letting him know that she'll be a bit late for dinner. It's already been 20 minutes later than when her appointment was scheduled, and she doesn't expect to be allowed entry anytime soon. She sighs, leaning down and wincing at the sudden pain in her back. It's been a couple of days since the test and everything is still just so sore. Recovery Girl had explained that it was a common side effect to the rapid healing that she was subject to, but it's still uncomfortable. Sometimes she breathes in too deeply and is reminded of the pressure of all those rocks, the pain localizing under her ribs and her shoulder. She grimaces again as she settles down, breathing rapidly through the remaining bruising. "Are you all right?" someone asks, and Ochako looks to the doorway, spotting someone sort of familiar. She recognizes him from the entrance exam, the one with the glasses and the dark hair. He's wearing clothing a little too formal for a teacher meeting. UA is still on a small break, so Ochako walked through the empty halls wearing overalls and a graphic tee feeling all types of out of place. Maybe this guy had the right idea to dress up. Recovering just fine, she gives a thumbs up, and pats the seat next to her. "I'm Ochako, and thanks by the way, understatement of the week, I didn't get to talk to you after everything." He nods, hurt, and sits down, his build making the chair look smaller than it is. "Iida Tenya, and I think you'd better thank that other kid. He convinced me to help." "Already done," she says. After Deku had saved her and stayed with her to go meet the nurse, she had hugged him. Plus, they've been texting over the past couple of days. Her dad had made fun of her when she had told him that she got a boy's phone number, but he probably would have made the same kind of jokes if she had gotten a girl's one. She had to explain to him that having a friend before even starting the school year was the best way to make more friends for the rest of the year. "What time is your appointment?" Iida says, nervously looking up at the clock.
20 minutes ago, she says, sighing. "Yours?" "Now," he says, and then after a second, "I have some concerns about how the physical exam went."
"Me too," Ochako sighs, resting her chin in her hand. That's why she's here, and why she's so nervous.
"You know," he says, my concerns are about you. I distracted you with my perilous situation." She jokes, but it's why she's here. She feels absolutely awful about what happened. "No, but depending on your issues, we could go in together. It would probably bolster my case and save time."
Ochako thinks for a moment. Honestly, at this point, the support might help her pounding heart rate. "Ochako," the secretary calls, and she looks up, watching as the door opens to the offices. Present Mike holds it open for a tall kid, thanking him for coming to see them. Ochako doesn't recognize the kid, dressed in equally casual clothes, but he looks entirely calm, with purple hair and straightforward eyes. He nods to present Mike and the secretary woman, and then walks to the door. That was the kid who took up her entire appointment.
"Sorry," he mutters as he leaves the secretary's office, slamming the door behind him. "Apologies, my young listeners. Ochako vaguely recalls this man's secondary career as a radio host, and that's the only thing that makes sense. I'll try to be quick with your appointments."
"We're going together," Ochako smiles, "so don't worry."
She's belatedly worried about that not being allowed, but he doesn't even blink. "Works for me." "What was that?" Iida asks, looking back to the door as the two of them stand up. Ochako brushes her overalls off, still shaking a little bit. "Just clearing up something," Present Mike says, "but no worries, it's all sorted now."
It didn't seem very sorted, since Ochako is still rattled about the sound of that door slamming, but she follows Iida as they enter the main office. It's almost empty, with only a few teachers milling about, drinking tea and chatting, all probably some sort of hero. Ochako doesn't have the brain for it, so she only vaguely recognizes a couple of them. She couldn't place any of their names though. "Here," Present Mike says, leading them to his desk. It's small and gray, with a few framed photos that Ochako can't see in a clear glass statue that's probably some sort of teaching award. But, she squints at the text. Best radio setlist, which is so vague, and also definitely not for teaching. Does that mean the best setlist of all time? That's a tall award, but the statue is pretty prestigious looking.
"So," he asks, and Ochako can't help but notice that the other teachers have quieted down a little, clearly paying attention. "Can I get you guys anything? Water? Tea?"
"I'm fine, thank you very much," Iida says, nodding slightly, and Ochako smiles and shakes her head. Iida continues, "We have some concerns." Present Mike spreads his hands, smiling pleasantly. He's all ears. Ochako understands that he apparently teaches English here, and if he's always this seemingly supportive, it might be nice in a classroom setting, if she gets in. She hunkers down a bit more into her chair. She wishes with all her heart that she was more selfish, because then she wouldn't have to be here, risking the greatest accomplishment of her life.
"I got injured," Ochako says, pointing to the scratches on her face, and rolling up her sleeve a bit, just enough to show the gnarly bruising and bandages. "Are you all right now?" he asks. "I saw the damage, and it wasn't," he trails off, then continues, "I formally apologize on behalf of the school." "I'm fine," Ochako says. She had also gotten a fruit basket from the principal, along with a couple get-well cards. She had recovered enough to walk by the end of the day with the help of the nurse, so it only felt like a little bit of an overkill. She wouldn't have been, though, Iida says. Ochako realizes that they might be here for different reasons. If this guy wants to complain about the unsafe practices of the UA exam, he's going to the wrong school entirely. This school famously has killed at least a kid every couple of years. There are a lot of contracts involved when you're registered. Ochako had to check to make sure that there weren't any unnecessary fees before entering the exam, which meant she had to read a lot of paperwork. She waits for Iida to continue, to start rambling about the dangers. "I'd like to exchange some of my points," Iida says.
"Sorry," Present Mike asks. "Me too," Ochako says, jumping in on the conversation, because she thinks they might actually be here for the same reason. It's selfish to leave well enough alone, because Deku did save her life, but potentially ruining her shot at UA. This is certainly new, Present Mike says. "Explain, my dear listeners. I was directed to help save this young lady." Iida gestures to her, but halfway through gathering some classmates to help, I had the opportunity to take out a three-pointer robot. That attack took me only around 70 seconds, but the time I spent away from her caused Ochako greater injury. I also forced the student, who had been watching guard and originally alerted me, to stay longer without another opportunity to gather points. It was an unnecessary and dangerous delay that I could have easily avoided. I would like to give 2 to him, and 4 to her, for the injury." "Who?" Present Mike asks. "Midoriya Izuku," Ochako interrupts, softer than she wants, "was the only reason I got saved. 3 different robots attacked the place I was injured, and if he hadn't called over other students, I would have been crushed. The first one was taken out by random chance, but the other 2 were taken down by students that he gathered, all in a group, all there to protect me." She takes a deep breath, "And if I hadn't been hurt, he could have spent time trying to get points. I want you to give 20 of my points to him." Ochako keeps her gaze steady, and Iida nods. Present Mike is faintly smiling, seemingly a little humored by the whole thing. "This is all incredibly heartwarming," he says, "but I wouldn't worry about him. The test was filmed, we know his acts of heroics. He works really well under pressure," and Iida looks over to Ochako. "I almost didn't help him. He was able to convince me. I feel terrible about the moment of hesitation, but moreover, he directed the rescue. He told me which students to bring to the scene, and he figured out who would do what. It was some brilliant strategy, using that kid with the tape quirk to stabilize everything. That was his suggestion, and I think he'd make a great addition to UA." "Exactly," Ochako says a little too enthusiastically. She blushes, then continues, "He said he didn't get any points, but he was the nicest and bravest kid I met that day, and that has to count for something." A couple of the other teachers are laughing at something, and Ochako hopes it's not her. "Listen. I can promise you that this has all been taken into consideration, and you really don't need to worry." He mutters something under his breath at the end of the sentence, something like, "if I have any say." There's a long stretch of silence, as Ochako considers her parents. She considers the suffocation under that rubble and the bright nervous eyes of Deku, and knows that this school really could use someone like him. "Fine," Iida says, "we'll trust you. There's a lingering, for now, that could certainly be considered a threat, but Present Mike just smiles, so that's all?" Ochako looks to Iida, and they nod in sync. "Get out of here then," Present Mike says, "enjoy your break." They leave together, and in the hall, Ochako pauses to say goodbye to the secretary. After she acquires 4 pieces of candy,
She finds Iida waiting outside of the door. As she walks out, she feels a huge weight lifted. She's not entirely sure, but she thinks that her points are safe and maybe Izuku did better than he said. I'm sorry for yelling at you before the test. Iida bows, and Ochako waves him off. No worries, we were kind of loud. She reaches her hand out, and they shake. She gives him 2 of her pieces of her candy in the handshake. Alright Ochako, he smiles, looking up at the clock, pocketing the candy. I must return home. But I will see you in class. Maybe, she reminds him. I don't think there's any maybe about it, he says, before jogging off in the other direction. Ochako was right. Making a friend before school starts is a really good gateway to more friends. She can't help but smile. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.